The dust hung in the air like a living thing, suspended in the amber light of late afternoon as Wyatt Sterling guided his mare through the crooked entrance of Black Hollow. The settlement wasn't much to look at, a haphazard collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence in a valley that seemed to want to swallow them whole. Wyatt had seen 100 towns like this scattered across the frontier, each one bleeding slowly into the earth, sustained only by stubborn hope and the kind of grinding labor that broke men's backs before their 30th year. But Wyatt Sterling wasn't here to philosophize about the hard life of frontier settlements. He was here for cattle. At 38 years old, Wyatt had built an empire that stretched across 3 territories. His Iron Ridge Ranch wasn't just prosperous, it was legendary. 10,000 head of longhorn, 200 horses bred for both beauty and endurance, and enough land to get lost in for a week if a man wasn't careful. He'd started with nothing but a lame horse and a talent for reading the value of livestock that others overlooked. 20 years of buying low, breeding smart, and never backing down from a hard negotiation had transformed him from a ranch hand with empty pockets into one of the wealthiest cattlemen west of the Mississippi. His clothes announced his success before he ever opened his mouth. Custom-fitted riding coat, boots made from leather so fine it probably cost more than most of the buildings he was passing, and a hat that had been shaped by craftsmen in St. Louis who catered to men with money to burn. Even his horse, a striking bay mare with a coat like polished mahogany, moved with the kind of grace that came from exceptional bloodlines and better feed. People noticed. A woman hanging laundry paused mid-motion, sheet forgotten in her hands. 2 men outside what passed for a general store stopped their conversation to watch him pass. A child peeking out from behind a water barrel stared with wide eyes. Wyatt was used to this attention. He'd stopped being uncomfortable with his own success years ago, right around the time he'd accepted that the emptiness inside him wasn't something money could fill. His wife, Caroline, had been dead for 6 years. Fever had taken her in 3 days, so fast he'd barely had time to understand what was happening before she was gone. They'd been married for 4 years. No children. After she died, Wyatt had thrown himself into building his empire with the kind of single-minded focus that either made a man rich or killed him trying. He'd gotten rich. The hollow feeling had stayed. The Black Hollow Hotel stood at the end of the main street, a generous name for a 2-story structure that looked like it was one strong wind away from collapse. Wyatt dismounted, looping his reins around a post that had probably been new when Lincoln was still practicing law. He was reaching for his saddlebag when he heard the first scream. It wasn't close. Somewhere deeper in town, behind the thin walls of frontier construction. A woman's voice, raw with pain or fear or both. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the street, the creak of wagon wheels, the low murmur of conversation, the distant hammer of a blacksmith, with shocking clarity. Wyatt froze, his hand still on the leather strap of his bag. He turned toward the sound, scanning the street for some kind of reaction. The woman with the laundry had gone very still, her face turned carefully away. The men outside the general store had stopped talking, but neither made a move. The child had disappeared entirely. "Help me, please! Oh, so. The second scream was worse than the first, choked off mid-plea with a sound that made Wyatt's stomach turn. He'd heard men scream on the battlefield during the war, heard cattle in distress, heard the sounds of violence and suffering that came with life on the frontier. This was different. This was the sound of someone breaking. He dropped the saddlebag and started walking toward the sound. Behind him, he heard someone call out, "Mister, you might want to, it." Wyatt didn't stop to hear what he might want to do. His boots hit the hard-packed dirt of the street with purpose, his long stride carrying him toward the source of the screams. The buildings blurred past, a saloon with a porch that sagged like a drunk's shoulders, a feed store with its windows boarded up, a shabby building that might have been a church once before it gave up and became something else. The screaming had stopped. Somehow that was worse. He found the house at the end of a narrow alley between 2 larger buildings. It was small, cramped, the kind of place that was probably stifling in summer and brutally cold in winter. The door was closed. A window with a torn curtain showed only darkness inside. Wyatt stood in front of that door and felt the weight of a choice settling on his shoulders. He'd learned long ago that getting involved in other people's business on the frontier was a good way to shorten your lifespan. Every man minded his own affairs, and you stayed alive by respecting that boundary. The smartest thing would be to walk away, conduct his business, buy the cattle he came for, and ride back to Iron Ridge where he belonged. From inside the house came a low sobbing, broken and defeated. Wyatt knocked on the door. "Everything all right in there?" The sobbing stopped immediately, replaced by a silence so absolute it felt alive. Then a man's voice, rough and edged with warning. "Go on about your business, stranger. Ain't nothing here concerns you." "Heard some screaming," Wyatt said, his hand resting on the doorframe. "Sounded like someone needed help. You heard a wife learning her place. Now get the hell away from my door before you learn yours." The words came with the kind of casual cruelty that Wyatt had heard before in the voices of men who enjoyed their power over others. Men who hurt people weaker than themselves because they could, because no one would stop them, because the frontier had a way of letting monsters thrive in the gaps where law and decency failed to reach. Wyatt should have walked away. He had no legal authority here, no moral obligation to a woman he'd never met. He had a ranch to run, business to conduct, a life waiting for him beyond this miserable town. He tried the door handle. Locked. "I'm going to ask one more time," Wyatt said, his voice level. "Is the woman in there hurt?" "I'm going to tell you one more time," the man inside replied. "Get your rich ass away from my property, or I'll come out there and teach you how we handle interference in Black Hollow." Wyatt took 2 steps back, measured the door with his eyes, and drove his boot into the wood just below the lock. The frame splintered with a crack like a gunshot. The door slammed open, rebounding off the interior wall. The scene inside stopped him cold. A woman sat crumpled in the corner of the room, her arms wrapped around her swollen belly. She was pregnant, heavily so, maybe 7 or 8 months, and her face was a map of fresh bruises. One eye was swelling shut. Blood trickled from her split lip. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, exposing more bruises on her upper arm in the distinct pattern of finger marks. Standing over her was a man built like a bull, all thick muscle and violent intent. He was maybe 45, with a face weathered by sun and alcohol, and eyes that held the flat, remorseless stare of something barely human. His hand was still raised, frozen mid-swing when the door burst open. For a moment, nobody moved. The man, Silas Crow, though Wyatt didn't know his name yet, stared at the intruder with an expression that went from shock to rage so fast it was almost impressive. The woman in the corner made a small, wounded sound, her terrified eyes fixed on Wyatt like he was either salvation or just another version of the nightmare she was already living. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Silas said, his voice dropping to something low and dangerous. "You got any idea who I am? What I can do to you?" "Don't know and don't care," Wyatt replied. He kept his voice calm, but his hand had moved to rest near the Colt revolver at his hip. It was a natural movement, practiced, the kind of casual readiness that came from years of knowing when violence might be seconds away. "The woman needs a doctor. I'm taking her to one." Silas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The hell you are. That's my wife. She's carrying my child. And if she needs a beating to remember her duties, that's between me and her." "Not anymore, it isn't. You want to die over some whore who can't follow simple instructions?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "I want you to step away from her right now." "Or what? You going to shoot an unarmed man in his own home?" Silas spread his arms wide, showing empty hands, but his eyes were calculating, measuring distances, looking for an opening. "That how they do things where you come from, rich boy? Because here in Black Hollow, we got our own ways of handling things. And outsiders who stick their nose where it don't belong tend to disappear into the hills." "Elena," Wyatt said, his eyes never leaving Silas, but his words directed at the woman. "Can you stand?" She didn't answer at first, just stared at him with that mix of hope and terror that came from too many broken promises. Then, slowly, she nodded. Using the wall for support, she pushed herself upright. Every movement looked painful. "You take 1 step toward that door with him," Silas said to her, his voice shaking with rage. "And I will hunt you down. I will find you. And what I do to you then will make today look like a damn kindness. You understand me?" Elena froze halfway to standing, her face draining of what little color it had left. "He's not going to touch you again," Wyatt said. He finally looked at Elena directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of certainty that came from a man used to making decisions and backing them up. "I give you my word. You come with me right now, and he doesn't lay another hand on you." Your word? Silas spat. Your word don't mean shit in this town. I run things here. Me. Every business, every ranch, every poor bastard trying to scratch out a living, they all answer to me. The sheriff answers to me. The mayor, hell, I own him outright. You think anyone's going to stand against me for some stranger in fancy boots? Maybe not, Wyatt said, but I'm standing against you right now. And I'm not from Black Hollow. The calculation in Silas's eyes shifted. He looked at Wyatt more carefully now, taking in the quality of the clothes, the confident stance, the kind of self-possession that usually came with either stupidity or genuine power. Who are you? Wyatt Sterling, Iron Ridge. The name registered. Wyatt saw it in the slight widening of Silas's eyes, the fractional pause before he responded. Everyone who raised cattle west of the Mississippi knew the name. The Sterling Ranch was legend, a success story told around campfires and in saloons, proof that a man could still build an empire if he was smart enough and tough enough and lucky enough to survive the building. Iron Ridge, Silas repeated slowly. His posture shifted, became marginally less aggressive, not backing down but recalculating. Heard of you. Heard you're a hard man in business, cold as winter when it comes to negotiation. That's one way to put it. So what's a cattle baron doing breaking into houses in a shit town like Black Hollow? Right now, Wyatt said. Making sure a pregnant woman gets to a doctor before she bleeds to death on your floor. She's fine. Women are tougher than you city folk think. She just needs to learn she needs a doctor, Wyatt cut him off. And you need to step aside. The moment stretched out, brittle and sharp. Wyatt could feel the weight of it, the way violence hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Silas was thinking about making a move. Wyatt could see it in the tension in his shoulders, the way his weight shifted to the balls of his feet. If this went wrong, one of them was going to die in this miserable cabin. Then footsteps sounded outside. Multiple sets, heavy boots hitting dirt with purpose. Wyatt didn't turn to look, but he could feel the presence of others gathering behind him in the doorway. Silas, what's the commotion? A new voice, older, with the reedy quality of a man who'd spent too many years breathing his own tobacco smoke. Someone said there was trouble. No trouble, Sheriff, Silas said, his eyes never leaving Wyatt. Just a misunderstanding with an outsider who forgot his manners. That's not how I see it, Wyatt said. I see a man beating a pregnant woman half to death. Where I come from, we call that a crime. Where you come from ain't here, the sheriff replied. There was a weariness in his voice, the sound of a man who'd compromised so many times he'd forgotten what his principles used to look like. And in Black Hollow, domestic matters are private. Man and wife work things out their own way. By work things out, you mean you let him beat her unconscious and call it marriage. I mean, it ain't the law's business unless she files a complaint, and I don't hear her complaining. Wyatt turned slightly, enough to see the sheriff in his peripheral vision. He was maybe 60, with a drinker's complexion and eyes that couldn't quite meet Wyatt's directly. Two men flanked him, ranch hands from the look of them, wearing guns and the kind of lazy confidence that came from knowing the local law was on their side. Elena, Wyatt said again, do you want to file a complaint? The silence that followed was crushing. Elena stood against the wall, trembling, her hand protective over her belly. Every person in that room knew what happened to women who filed complaints against powerful men, knew how those stories ended. The frontier was littered with graves of people who'd stood up for themselves when they should have kept their heads down. She's got nothing to say, Silas said, his voice warming with triumph. Because she knows what's good for her. Now, Mr. Sterling, I respect what you built up at Iron Ridge. I truly do. But you're out of your element here. This is Black Hollow business. So why don't you head on back to the hotel, get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow we can talk about whatever cattle deal brought you here in the first place. Water under the bridge. No hard feelings. Wyatt looked at Elena. Looked at her swollen eye, her split lip, the way she held herself like she was waiting for the next blow. He thought about Caroline, about the 4 years they'd had before fever took her. She'd been strong, independent, full of life and laughter. The idea of someone raising a hand to her would have been unthinkable. But Caroline had been lucky. She'd married a man who loved her, lived in a time and place where law mattered, died before the world could show her its cruelest faces. Elena hadn't been lucky. No, Wyatt said quietly. No? Silas frowned. No what? No hard feelings, no water under the bridge, no pretending I didn't see what I saw. Wyatt straightened to his full height, his hand still resting near his gun. The woman's coming with me. She needs medical attention. After that, she can decide what she wants to do, but right now, today, she's done being your personal target. You're making a mistake, the sheriff said, and now there was something almost pleading in his voice. Silas Crow owns half this territory. His ranch supplies work to a quarter of the people in Black Hollow. You cross him, you're not just crossing one man, you're crossing the entire power structure of this settlement. Is that really the fight you want? I've had worse fights, Wyatt replied. Then he looked directly at Elena. Last chance. You want to stay here? I'll walk away. You want to get help? We're leaving now, but you have to decide. Elena's mouth opened, closed. She looked at Silas, at the sheriff, at the men in the doorway. Then, in a voice so small it was almost a whisper, she said, "Help me." Those two words changed everything. Wyatt moved fast. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, positioned himself between Elena and Silas, and offered her his arm. "Hold on to me. Can you walk?" "I think so." "Then we're going to walk out of here slowly. You stay on your feet, you keep moving, and you don't look back. Understand?" She nodded, her hand gripping his arm so tightly he could feel her nails through the fabric of his coat. They moved toward the door. The sheriff and his men didn't step aside at first, creating a wall of bodies between them and the street. Wyatt stopped a foot away, his free hand now resting openly on his gun. "Move," he said. It wasn't loud, wasn't aggressive, just flat statement of fact. "Sterling," the sheriff tried one more time. "You're new here. You don't understand how things—" "Move or I'll move you. Your choice." The sheriff looked past Wyatt to Silas, some silent communication passing between them. Then, with obvious reluctance, he stepped aside. His men followed suit, creating a narrow gap. Wyatt and Elena moved through it, out into the alley, into the fading afternoon light. Behind them, Wyatt could hear Silas's voice, low and venomous. "This isn't over, Sterling. Not even close. You just signed your own death warrant." Wyatt didn't respond. He just kept walking, supporting Elena's weight as she stumbled beside him. By the time they reached the main street, a small crowd had gathered. People stared, whispered, kept their distance. A town that had learned to mind its own business was watching a stranger throw their carefully maintained peace into chaos. "Is there a doctor here?" Wyatt called out. "Anyone?" An older man stepped forward from the crowd. He was thin, gray-haired, wearing spectacles that had been repaired so many times they were more wire than frame. "I'm Dr. Boone." "What happened?" "She needs help. She's pregnant and she's been beaten." Dr. Boone's face went very still. He glanced at Elena, then at the mouth of the alley where Silas's silhouette was visible in the doorway. "Bring her to my office. It's 2 buildings down, the one with the red cross painted on the door." They moved as a strange procession through the street. Wyatt supporting Elena, Dr. Boone leading the way, and the crowd watching like they were witnessing an execution instead of a rescue. No one offered to help. No one spoke words of encouragement. They just watched, their faces closed and fearful, as the outsider did what none of them had been willing to do. The doctor's office was cramped and poorly lit, but it was clean. Medicine bottles lined shelves along one wall. An examination table dominated the center of the room. Dr. Boone cleared off a pile of papers and helped Elena lie down. "What's your name, my dear?" he asked gently. "Elena. Elena Voss." "Elena, I'm going to examine you now. Check on you and the baby. Is that all right?" She nodded, tears starting to stream down her bruised face. Not from pain now, but from something else. Relief, maybe. Or just the overwhelming feeling of being treated like a human being instead of property. Wyatt stepped back to give them space. He moved to the window, looking out at the street. People were dispersing now, returning to their lives, pretending they hadn't seen anything. But at the end of the street, in front of the cabin he'd broken into, Silas Crow stood with his arms crossed, staring directly at the doctor's office. Even from this distance, the message was clear. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Boone called softly. "Could you step outside for a moment?" Wyatt turned. The doctor's face was grim. "Is she—" "She's alive, the baby too, as far as I can tell. But she's been hurt badly, and not just today. This has been going on for a while." Dr. Boone removed his spectacles, cleaned them with a handkerchief that had seen better days. "What you did was brave. Probably stupid, but brave. Silas Crow doesn't forget, doesn't forgive. You need to understand what you've started here. I understand I couldn't walk away from a woman being beaten to death. Noble sentiment. But nobility doesn't stop bullets, and Silas has men who'll pull triggers on his say-so. The doctor replaced his spectacles. Elena can't go back to him. That much is clear. If she does, he'll kill her. Maybe not today, but soon. He'll wait until there are no witnesses, no strangers around to interfere, and he'll finish what you interrupted. Then she doesn't go back. Where does she go? This is Black Hollow. Silas owns or controls almost everything. Anyone who takes her in becomes his enemy. Most people here have families, children, livelihoods that depend on staying on Silas's good side. Wyatt was quiet for a moment, thinking. There's got to be someone. A church? A women's shelter? We have a boarding house run by a widow named Ruth Mercer. She's about the only person in town who doesn't owe Silas money or favors. Stubborn as hell, too. If anyone would take Elena in, it'd be her. Then that's where Elena goes. And what about you? Dr. Boone asked. You're not from here. You have no stake in Black Hollow. You could ride out tonight, get back to your ranch, forget this ever happened. No one would blame you. Wyatt looked back out the window. Silas was still there, still watching. A few men had joined him now, creating a small gathering of threat and intent. The smart play was obvious. Leave. Let Black Hollow solve its own problems. He had money, power, an empire to run. Getting killed over a woman he didn't know in a town that didn't want his help would be the stupidest way possible to throw all that away. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Caroline's face. Remembered the way she'd laughed, the way she'd made even the hardest days bearable just by existing in the same space. Remembered holding her hand while fever burned through her, powerless to stop it, useless despite all his money and success. He'd failed to save his wife. Maybe that was why he couldn't walk away now. Or maybe he was just tired of being the kind of man who only protected what was his. I'll stay, Wyatt said. At least until we know Elena and the baby are safe. That could take weeks, months even. Then that's how long I'll stay. Dr. Boone studied him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the dumbest. Haven't decided which yet. Probably both, Wyatt admitted. They moved Elena after dark, when the street was empty and most of Black Hollow was either drunk or sleeping. Ruth Mercer's boarding house sat at the far edge of town, a two-story structure that was better maintained than most of the buildings around it. Ruth herself was maybe 50, built like someone who'd spent her life working hard and taking no nonsense from anyone. When Dr. Boone explained the situation, she barely hesitated. Bring her in, Ruth said, holding the door wide. I've got a room upstairs. Private, away from the street. Silas will come after her, Dr. Boone warned. Let him try. This is my house, my rules. Ruth's eyes were steel. I've lived in Black Hollow for 30 years. Watched this town go from a decent place to a hellhole run by that bastard. About time someone stood up to him. They settled Elena into a small room with a window overlooking a vegetable garden. It wasn't much, a bed, a chair, a wash basin, but it was clean and warm and safe. Elena fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted beyond words. Downstairs, Ruth poured coffee for Wyatt and Dr. Boone. They sat at her kitchen table, the silence heavy with the weight of what had happened. You know he'll retaliate, Ruth said finally. Silas doesn't let challenges go unanswered. He'll come at you hard, Sterling, and he'll come at anyone helping you. I know. Are you prepared for that? For what it might cost? Wyatt wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, feeling its warmth. No, he admitted. I'm not prepared. I didn't come here looking for a fight, but I'm not running from one either. Why? Ruth asked. You don't know Elena. Don't know this town. You've got your own life waiting somewhere else. What makes her worth risking all that? It was a fair question. Wyatt had been asking himself the same thing since he'd kicked down that door. The logical answer was that it wasn't worth it. That one woman's life, however tragic, wasn't worth his own. That the smart money said to cut his losses and run. But the logical answer felt wrong in a way he couldn't quite articulate. 6 years ago my wife died, he said quietly. Fever took her in 3 days. I had all the money in the world, could afford the best doctors, the finest medicines. None of it mattered. She died anyway, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. He paused, staring into his coffee. I built my ranch into an empire because it was the only thing I could control. I could buy land, breed horses, grow my wealth. I was good at it, but it didn't fill the hole Caroline left behind. It didn't make me feel like I was doing anything that mattered. He looked up at Ruth and Dr. Boone. Today I heard a woman screaming, and I could do something about it. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe it's just me trying to make up for failing Caroline. But I'm not walking away. Ruth nodded slowly. That's either very honest or very foolish. Like I said, probably both. They talked for another hour, planning. Ruth knew the town, knew which people might be sympathetic and which were firmly in Silas's pocket. Dr. Boone knew who was reliable in a crisis. Between them, they painted a picture of Black Hollow as a town that had been slowly strangled by one man's ambition and cruelty. Silas had started as a ranch foreman 15 years ago, worked his way up through a combination of hard work and harder violence. He'd bought his first land with money no one quite understood the source of, expanded through intimidation and strategic partnerships. Now he controlled enough of the local economy that crossing him meant economic ruin for most families. The sheriff's useless, Dr. Boone said. Silas owns him completely. There's a federal marshal who passes through every few months, but he's never here when you need him. What about the town council? Is there anyone with authority who might stand against Silas? Town council meets Silas's approval before they do anything. He doesn't hold an official position, but he runs everything from behind the scenes. Ruth refilled their coffee cups. The truth is, Mr. Sterling, Black Hollow gave up its spine years ago. People are too scared, too poor, or too compromised to fight back. You're asking for help from a town that's forgotten how to help itself. Then we remind them, Wyatt said. With what? Pretty words and moral arguments? With proof that he can be stood against. With visible protection for Elena, with the resources I can bring to bear. Wyatt leaned forward. Silas has power because people believe he's untouchable. We need to make them believe something else is possible. You're talking about challenging the entire structure of power in this town, Dr. Boone said. That's not a weekend project. That's potentially months of conflict, and it could turn deadly fast. I know. Your ranch back in Iron Ridge. Who's running it while you're here? I have a foreman, good man named Tom Garrett. He can handle things for a while. A while might turn into a long while. Then it does. Ruth stood, walking to the window. Outside, Black Hollow slept under a cold moon, its secrets buried behind closed doors and careful silence. If you're serious about this, she said, not turning around, you need to understand something. This town has been broken for a long time. People here have learned to survive by keeping their heads down and their mouths shut. You're asking them to risk everything they have, their homes, their families, their lives, on the hope that you can actually beat Silas Crow. That's a big ask, Mr. Sterling. I know it is. So what makes you think they'll take that chance? Wyatt didn't have a good answer for that. He was asking people to trust a stranger, to bet their lives on a wealthy outsider who'd appeared out of nowhere with promises of protection. It was an absurd proposition when he thought about it clearly. But he also remembered Elena's face when she'd whispered, "Help me." Remembered the relief in her eyes when she realized someone was actually going to stand between her and the man who'd been destroying her. Maybe that was enough. Maybe one person believing things could be different was how change started. I don't know if they'll trust me, Wyatt admitted, but I know they won't trust Silas. They're scared of him, dependent on him, trapped by him. But they don't trust him. There's a difference. And maybe, if we give them a real alternative, some of them will take it. Ruth turned from the window, her expression unreadable. You're either going to save this town or get a lot of people killed trying. I honestly don't know which. Neither do I, Wyatt said. But doing nothing feels worse. They parted after midnight. Dr. Boone headed back to his office. Ruth went upstairs to check on Elena, and Wyatt stepped out into the cold night air. The street was empty, but he could feel eyes watching from dark windows. Word would spread fast. By morning, everyone in Black Hollow would know what had happened, would know that the stranger from Iron Ridge had directly challenged Silas Crow. The question was what would happen next. Wyatt walked slowly back toward the hotel, his hand resting on his gun out of habit. The night was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt temporary, like a breath held before a scream. Somewhere in the darkness, Silas Crow was planning his response. Somewhere in the shadows, men were being gathered, instructions given, violence prepared. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Wyatt knew that. Knew it with the certainty of someone who'd lived long enough on the frontier to understand how these things worked. You didn't humiliate a man like Silas in front of his own people without paying a price. The only question was how high that price would be. As he reached the hotel, Wyatt looked back toward Ruth's boarding house. A single light burned in an upstairs window. Elena's room, probably. Ruth checking on her, making sure she was safe. One small light against the darkness of Black Hollow. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He went inside, locked the door behind him, and sat by the window with his gun in his lap. Sleep could wait. Tonight, staying alert mattered more, because the stranger from Iron Ridge had just declared war on the monster that owned this town. And monsters didn't take kindly to challenges. Dawn broke over Black Hollow like a wound opening, all red and raw across the eastern sky. Wyatt hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in that chair by the window, watching the street, his Colt within easy reach. Around 4 a.m, he'd seen shadows moving between buildings. 3 men, maybe 4, circling Ruth's boarding house like wolves around a campfire. They hadn't tried anything, just watched and moved on. A message. "We know where she is. We're coming." The hotel keeper brought coffee at sunrise, a nervous man in his 50s who couldn't meet Wyatt's eyes. "Word's all over town about what you done," he said, setting the pot down with shaking hands. "Silas's boy's been drinking all night at the saloon, talking loud about teaching lessons and settling scores." "Anyone say when they're planning to make their move?" "Didn't hear specifics. But if I was you, Mr. Sterling, I'd settle my bill and ride out before noon. That's just friendly advice from someone who'd rather not clean blood off his floor." "I appreciate the advice," Wyatt said, pouring himself a cup. "But I'm staying." The hotel keeper shook his head. "Your funeral, literally." He hurried out, leaving Wyatt alone with coffee that tasted like dirt and the certainty that today would get ugly. By the time Wyatt made his way to Ruth's boarding house, the street was alive with the kind of tense awareness that preceded violence. People moved quickly, didn't linger, kept their eyes down. A woman hustling children toward the general store glanced at Wyatt, then quickly looked away. An old man sitting on a porch spat tobacco juice and muttered something that might have been a prayer or a curse. Ruth answered the door before he could knock. "Get inside, fast." The boarding house kitchen smelled like bacon and fresh bread, normal things that felt absurd against the backdrop of what was coming. Dr. Boone sat at the table, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Ruth moved between the stove and the counter with the kind of aggressive efficiency that meant she was working to keep her hands busy and her mind from dwelling on fear. "How's Elena?" Wyatt asked. "Resting. Her fever broke around 3. The baby's still moving, which is a good sign." Dr. Boone rubbed his face with both hands. "But she's not out of danger. The physical trauma, the stress, her body's been through hell. She needs rest, safety, time to heal. All the things she's not going to get in Black Hollow. Then we make sure she gets them anyway." Ruth set a plate of food in front of Wyatt, eggs, bacon, bread still warm from the oven. "You need to eat. Whatever's coming, you'll need your strength." "Has there been any word from Silas?" "Oh, there's been word," Ruth said grimly. "Half the town's talking about it. He's telling anyone who'll listen that you assaulted him in his own home, kidnapped his wife, turned the town against him. He's playing the victim, making you out to be the villain." "And people believe him?" "Some do. Some know better but pretend to believe because it's safer. And some just don't care as long as the violence doesn't reach their doorstep." She sat down across from him. "Silas sent a message this morning, through the sheriff, official-like, says he wants to talk to you. Peaceful resolution, no bloodshed." "That's a trap." "Of course it's a trap. But refusing the meeting makes you look unreasonable. Silas is smart. He's backing you into a corner where either you walk into obvious danger or you refuse and give him justification for whatever he does next." Wyatt ate mechanically, thinking, "What about witnesses? If we meet somewhere public, with people watching—" "He'll still kill you," Dr. Boone interrupted. "Maybe not right there, but soon after. An accident on the road, a robbery gone wrong, something with plausible deniability. Silas has been disappearing problems for 15 years. He's good at it. So what do you suggest?" that you get on your horse and ride like hell back to Iron Ridge. You did what you could. Elena's safe for now. Let someone else take over from here." "Who? You?" Wyatt looked at the doctor steadily. "No offense, but you're a good man in a bad situation. If you had the power to stop Silas, you would have done it years ago." Dr. Boone's face flushed. "You think I like being powerless? You think I enjoy patching up women and children after Silas's men are done with them? I've sewn up split lips, set broken bones, delivered babies to mothers so terrified they can barely breathe. And all I can do is fix the damage and send them back into the same hell that broke them in the first place. So don't you dare suggest I haven't tried." "I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying you can't do it alone. None of you can, but maybe together." "Together?" Ruth laughed, but it was bitter. "Look around, Mr. Sterling. This is it. This is your army. Me, an old widow who runs a boarding house. The doctor, who's good with a scalpel but useless with a gun. And you, a rich cattle baron who's very brave and very naive about how things work in towns like this. Then help me understand how things work." Ruth stood, walked to the window, looked out at the street with her arms crossed. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, tired. 15 years ago, Black Hollow was different. We had law that meant something, had people who stood up for each other. Then Silas came. Started small, just a foreman on the Dawson Ranch. But he was ambitious, ruthless. Within 2 years, Old Man Dawson was dead. Heart attack, supposedly, though there were whispers about poison. Silas married Dawson's widow, took control of the ranch. The widow disappeared 6 months later. Another tragic accident. And nobody investigated? The sheriff at the time tried. Good man named Walsh. Found enough evidence to ask uncomfortable questions. They found him in a ravine with a broken neck. Thrown from his horse, they said. Walsh's deputy knew the truth, but he had 3 children to feed. So he kept quiet, took the sheriff's badge, and learned to look the other way. Dr. Boone picked up the story. After that, Silas expanded fast. Bought up failing businesses, made loans to struggling families, inserted himself into every economic transaction in Black Hollow. By the time people realized what was happening, he'd built a web they couldn't escape. You owe Silas money? You do what he says. Your business relies on his supply chain? You keep your mouth shut. Your son works on his ranch? You ignore the bruises on your neighbor's wife. Control through economic dependence, Wyatt said. Exactly. And backed up with just enough violence to keep people scared. Silas doesn't need to kill everyone who crosses him. Just a few examples. Just enough to make sure everyone else knows what happens when you step out of line. Wyatt pushed his plate away, appetite gone. What about outside help? Federal marshals? Territorial authorities? Takes weeks for a message to reach them, months for them to respond. And Silas has friends in those offices too. Men he's paid off, men who owe him favors. The frontier's a big place, Mr. Sterling. Lots of room for corruption to thrive where no one's watching. The hopelessness of it settled over the kitchen like smoke. Wyatt could feel the weight of what he'd stepped into, the magnitude of the system Silas had built. Taking down one violent man was possible. Dismantling an entire structure of power and fear and economic control? That was a different kind of battle entirely. A battle he had no idea how to fight. Footsteps on the stairs broke the silence. Elena appeared in the doorway, moving slowly, one hand braced against the wall for support. She'd changed into a clean dress Ruth must have provided, and someone had cleaned the blood from her face. But the bruises were worse in daylight, deep purple and black, covering half her face. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut. You shouldn't be up, Dr. Boone said immediately, standing. I heard voices, wanted to know what was happening. Elena's good eye found Wyatt. Is it true? Is Silas coming after you because of me? He's coming after me because he's a bastard who doesn't like being challenged, Wyatt said. This isn't your fault. It is, though. I should have kept quiet. Should have. Should have what? Let him beat you to death? Let him kill that baby you're carrying? Wyatt's voice was harder than he intended. He softened it. You did nothing wrong, Elena. Nothing. She moved into the room, eased herself into a chair with visible effort. Up close, Wyatt could see other injuries, finger-shaped bruises on her arms, a cut on her neck, the careful way she held her ribs. This hadn't been one beating. This was sustained, deliberate cruelty stretched over weeks or months. How long has he been hurting you? Wyatt asked gently. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Since the wedding night. 3 years ago. Her voice was flat, emotionless. The tone of someone who'd told themselves this story so many times it had lost all meaning. I was working at the saloon. Not that kind of working, just serving drinks, cleaning tables. Silas came in one night, said I was pretty, said he'd marry me. Give me a real life. I was 20 years old and stupid enough to think a marriage proposal was the same as love. You weren't stupid, Ruth said quietly. I was. The first time he hit me, I told myself it was a mistake. He'd been drinking. He was stressed about the ranch. It would get better. It didn't get better. It got worse. And then I got pregnant, and I thought, her voice cracked slightly. I thought maybe a baby would change things, would make him gentler. But it just made him angrier. Said the baby was probably some other man's. Said I was trying to trap him, started hitting me harder, aiming for my stomach. The kitchen was silent, except for the clock ticking on the wall and the sound of Elena's ragged breathing as she fought to keep her composure. I tried to leave once, she continued. Got as far as the edge of town before his men caught me, dragged me back. He locked me in the cellar for 3 days. No food, no water, just darkness. When he finally let me out, he said if I ever tried to run again, he'd make sure I couldn't walk when he was done. Why didn't you go to the sheriff? Wyatt asked, though he already knew the answer. I did. The first month. Showed him the bruises. He told me marriage was hard, that men and women worked things out in their own way. Said Silas was an important man in Black Hollow, and making accusations against him without proof could cause problems. What kind of proof was I supposed to have? The marks on my body weren't enough? Dr. Boone made a disgusted sound. Walsh would have helped you. The old sheriff, but he's been dead for 12 years. The current one's just a coward with a badge. Elena looked at Wyatt with her one good eye, and there was something haunting in her gaze. Why did you help me? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything. You could have walked away. It was the same question Ruth had asked last night, the same question Wyatt had been asking himself. He still didn't have a good answer. Because it was the right thing to do, he said finally. That's all. The right thing to do gets people killed in Black Hollow. Maybe, but the wrong thing to do has been killing this town slowly for 15 years, so I'll take my chances with right. A knock at the door made everyone jump. Ruth moved to answer it, peering through the curtain first. It's the sheriff. Don't let him in, Elena said immediately, fear flooding her face. He's alone. No gun drawn. Ruth looked back at Wyatt. Your call. Wyatt stood, checked his own gun, nodded. Ruth opened the door. The sheriff stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking even more worn than he had yesterday. Up close, Wyatt could see the broken blood vessels in his nose, the tremor in his hands, the signs of a man who'd drowned his conscience in whiskey years ago and never come up for air. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Mercer, I need to speak with you. So speak, Ruth said, not moving from the doorway. Silas wants to talk. Work this out peaceful-like before things get out of hand. Things are already out of hand, Wyatt said, unless you're here to arrest him for assault, battery, and attempted murder. The sheriff winced. It ain't that simple. Mr. Crow says you broke into his home, assaulted him, kidnapped his pregnant wife. From a legal standpoint, he beat a pregnant woman nearly to death, Dr. Boone cut in. I examined her, Sheriff, documented every injury, fresh bruises, broken ribs, internal bleeding. That baby might not survive because of what he did. That's between a man and his wife. No, Wyatt said flatly. It's not. And if you actually believed that, you wouldn't look so sick saying it. The sheriff's face flushed. Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but I got a job to keep, a family to feed. Black Hollow's got its own way of doing things, and outsiders stirring up trouble. I'm not stirring up trouble. I'm stopping it. By doing what? You gonna fight Silas? You and what army? He's got 30 men working his ranch, half of them meaner than rattlesnakes. He's got money to hire more. He's got connections to people who can make you disappear, and no one would ever ask questions. You're one man, Mr. Sterling, one rich, stubborn man who doesn't know when he's outmatched. Then I'll learn. The sheriff put his hat back on, shaking his head. Silas wants to meet. Today, noon at the saloon, public place, witnesses. He just wants to talk, work out an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? I don't know the details, but he's willing to negotiate. That's more than most folks get from him. You should take the offer. Tell Silas I'll think about it. That ain't... I said I'll think about it. Wyatt's voice went cold. Now get off Mrs. Mercer's property before I decide to file charges against you for harassment. The sheriff opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked away with the defeated posture of a man who'd stopped believing in anything years ago. Ruth shut the door, locked it. He's lying. About the peaceful talk, I mean. Silas doesn't negotiate. I know. So you're not actually considering meeting him? I'm considering all my options, Wyatt said, which right now seem to be walk into an obvious trap, refuse and wait for him to come here, or figure out a third option I haven't thought of yet. There is no third option, Dr. Boone said, not in Black Hollow. But Wyatt was already thinking, his mind working through the problem like it was a business negotiation. Silas had resources, manpower, local knowledge. He controlled the economic infrastructure and the legal system. Fighting him directly was suicide. Running away meant abandoning Elena and accomplishing nothing. So what did Wyatt have that Silas didn't? Money, for one thing. Wyatt's fortune wasn't just cattle. It was land, investments, connections to other wealthy ranchers across 3 territories. Silas might control Black Hollow, but Wyatt had reach beyond this town. And something else. Something that had been nagging at the back of his mind since last night's conversation. Silas married Old Man Dawson's widow, Wyatt said slowly. What happened to her exactly? Ruth frowned. Like I said, she disappeared. About 6 months after the wedding. Silas reported her missing, said she'd gone to visit family back east and never returned. Everyone knew that was horse shit, but there was no body, no proof. And before that? Before she married Silas? She was devastated by her husband's death, withdrawn, stopped coming to town. Some folks said she looked afraid, but she never said anything directly. So there might be other victims, other women Silas has hurt or killed. Probably, Dr. Boone said, but proving it after all these years would be impossible. Not if we find witnesses, not if we find evidence. Elena spoke up from her chair, her voice hoarse. There was a woman. Before me. Mexican girl named Rosa. She worked at the ranch for about a year. Silas took an interest in her. Then one day she was just gone. Silas said she'd stolen money and run off. But I found a piece of her dress in the barn, torn and bloody. I asked about it once. Silas hit me so hard I lost a tooth. The room went very quiet. How many? Wyatt asked. How many women do you think he's hurt? I don't know, but I've heard things. Whispers. Other ranch hands would mention names sometimes when they thought I couldn't hear. Women who vanished or died under suspicious circumstances. Silas has been doing this a long time, Mr. Sterling, and he's gotten very good at hiding it. Wyatt felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. This wasn't just about Elena anymore. This was about a pattern of violence stretching back years, maybe decades. A man who'd built his power on the broken bodies of women no one would protect. We need proof, he said. Documentation. Witnesses willing to testify. If I can build a case strong enough to bring federal attention, that'll take months, Ruth interrupted. Elena doesn't have months. Hell, you might not have days. Silas isn't going to wait around while you investigate him. Then we buy time. We make it too dangerous for him to move openly. We turn his own tactics against him. How? I need to send a telegram, Wyatt said. Is there a telegraph office in town? At the general store, but the operator's loyal to Silas. Doesn't matter, I'm not hiding what I'm doing. Wyatt stood, checked his gun again. I'm going to contact every federal authority I can reach. Marshals, territorial governors, anyone with power outside Silas's influence. I'm going to make noise, lots of it. Make sure everyone knows what's happening in Black Hollow. Silas thrives in the dark. Let's drag him into the light. That's going to make him desperate, Dr. Boone warned. Good. Desperate men make mistakes. Ruth looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're either crazy or brilliant. I genuinely can't tell which. Maybe both, Wyatt said. It was becoming his standard answer. He left the boarding house through the back door, taking the long way around to avoid the main street. The telegraph office was attached to the general store, a cramped space that smelled like old paper and metal. The operator was a thin man with suspicious eyes who looked up when Wyatt entered. Help you? Need to send 3 telegrams. Different recipients. That'll cost you. Wyatt laid gold coins on the counter, more than enough to cover the fee twice over. The operator's eyes widened slightly. The first telegram went to the federal marshal's office in Denver. Wyatt kept it simple and direct, requesting immediate investigation into criminal activity in Black Hollow, including assault, battery, suspected murder, and corruption of local law enforcement. He included his name, his credentials as owner of Iron Ridge, and a promise of substantial compensation for swift action. The second went to a cattle baron named Harrison, who owned land adjacent to Silas's ranch. Wyatt had met Harrison once at a livestock auction, remembered him as a hard but honest man. The message was brief, asking if Harrison had experienced trouble with Silas Crow, offering to discuss mutual concerns. The third telegram went to his own foreman back at Iron Ridge. 10 words. Delayed indefinitely. Send supplies and 2 reliable men. Sterling. The operator wrote everything down with shaking hands, clearly aware that these messages would reach Silas within the hour. "This is going to cause problems," he said quietly. "That's the idea. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Silas doesn't forgive, doesn't forget." "Neither do I," Wyatt said, and walked out before the operator could respond. The street was busier now, mid-morning traffic of people going about their daily routines while pretending they didn't notice the stranger who'd turned their town upside down. Wyatt could feel eyes following him, hear the whispers starting as soon as he passed. Good. Let them talk. Let Silas hear about every move he made. He was halfway back to Ruth's boarding house when 3 men stepped out of an alley, blocking his path. They weren't trying to hide their intentions. All 3 wore guns openly, hands resting on the grips. The one in the middle was big, easily 6.5 feet tall, with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw. The other 2 flanked him like trained dogs waiting for a command. "Mr. Sterling," the big man said. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost polite. "Mr. Crow would like a word." "Tell Mr. Crow I'll get back to him." "I'm afraid that's not acceptable. Mr. Crow wants to speak with you now." Wyatt assessed the situation quickly. 3 armed men, all younger and probably faster than him. The street wasn't empty, but no one was going to interfere. A fight here would be brief and bloody, and he'd probably lose. But he also knew that going with them voluntarily was suicide. "I'm not interested in what Mr. Crow finds acceptable," Wyatt said calmly. "Tell him if he wants to talk, he can come find me himself. In the meantime, get out of my way." The big man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "That seems to be my specialty." The man's hand tightened on his gun. For a moment, Wyatt thought it was going to happen right here, a shootout in the middle of Black Hollow's main street, witnessed by dozens of people who'd all suddenly develop amnesia when asked what they saw. Then a voice called out from behind the 3 men. "Problem here, gentlemen?" Everyone turned. An older man stood there, maybe 65, dressed in travel-worn clothes and carrying a rifle casually over his shoulder. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent their life outdoors and the calm confidence of someone who knew how to use the weapon he carried. "This ain't your concern, old man," the big man said. "Maybe not, but I'm making it my concern." The older man's eyes shifted to Wyatt. "You Mr. Sterling, the cattle baron from Iron Ridge?" "I am. Name's Jacob Holt. I own a small ranch about 10 miles north of here. Heard you were in town. Heard about what you did for Elena Voss. Figured you might could use someone watching your back." The 3 men looked uncertain now. This wasn't in their script. They'd expected an isolated target, easy intimidation. Adding another armed man, especially one who looked like he knew his business, changed the equation. "Mr. Holt," the big man said, his voice hardening, "you don't want to get involved in this." "See, that's where you're wrong. I'm already involved. Have been for years, watching Silas Crow turn this territory into his personal kingdom. Someone finally stands up to him. I figure that's worth supporting." "That kind of support could get you killed." "Son, I'm 67 years old, been shot twice, survived 2 winters without proper shelter, and buried 3 children before they turned 10. I've made peace with dying. Question is, have you?" The standoff stretched out, tense and fragile. Wyatt kept his hand near his gun, watching for any twitch, any sign that this was about to go sideways. Somewhere down the street, a horse whinnied. A door slammed. Normal sounds in a moment that was anything but normal. Finally, the big man stepped back. "This ain't over." "Never thought it was," Wyatt replied. The 3 men walked away, but slowly, making sure everyone saw they were leaving by choice. not from fear. As soon as they were out of sight, Wyatt felt the tension drain from his shoulders, leaving him slightly shaky. "Thank you," he said to Jacob Holt. "That could have gotten ugly." "Oh, it's going to get ugly regardless," Jacob said cheerfully. "But maybe not today, at least. You got somewhere we can talk private?" They ended up back at Ruth's boarding house, the kitchen becoming an impromptu war room. Jacob knew Ruth and Dr. Boone, greeted them like old friends, accepted coffee with easy familiarity. Elena had gone back upstairs to rest, which was probably for the best. The conversation that followed wasn't for the faint of heart. "I've been waiting 15 years for someone to take on Silas Crow," Jacob said, warming his hands on the coffee mug. "Watched him build his little empire, hurt people, run roughshod over anyone who stood in his way. Lost my own daughter to him, in a manner of speaking." "What happened?" Wyatt asked. "She was engaged to a young man who worked on Silas's ranch. Good kid, honest worker. One day he saw something he shouldn't have. Silas beating a stable hand half to death for spilling a bucket of water. Kid reported it to the sheriff. Week later they found him dead, trampled by horses, supposedly. My daughter knew the truth, tried to speak up. Silas made it clear that if she kept talking, she'd end up in a grave next to her fiancé." Jacob's face was calm, but his eyes held old pain. "She left Black Hollow, moved to California, married a shopkeeper out there. I get letters once a year. She's safe. But she had to leave everything she knew, everyone she loved because of that bastard. So yeah, Mr. Sterling, when I heard you stood up to him, I figured it was time I did the same." "Standing up to him might get you killed," Wyatt said. "Might, but not standing up to him means living with the shame of doing nothing while he keeps destroying lives. I'm old enough to know which regret I'd rather die with." Ruth refilled everyone's coffee. "Jacob's place is small, but it's defensible. If things get bad, we could move Elena there." "Too isolated," Dr. Boone objected. "If she goes into labor or has complications, I need to be able to reach her quickly." "Then we fortify here," Wyatt said. "Ruth's boarding house becomes our stronghold. We board up the lower windows, set up watch rotations, make it clear that anyone coming for Elena will have to go through us." 3 old people and a cattle baron against Silas's small army," Ruth said dryly. "Those are terrible odds." 4 people, a voice said from the stairs. They all turned. Elena stood there, one hand on the railing, the other on her belly. She looked fragile still, but there was something new in her eyes, something hard. "Elena, you need to rest," Dr. Boone started. "I've been resting. I've been hiding. I've been quiet and obedient and terrified for 3 years. I'm done." She moved into the kitchen, lowered herself into a chair. "This is my fight as much as yours. More, actually. So if you're planning a defense, I'm part of it." "You can barely walk," Wyatt said gently. "I can shoot. Silas made sure I knew how, liked to take me hunting, forced me to kill rabbits and birds while he watched. He thought it was funny, but I learned, and I'm a decent shot when I have to be." Ruth looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, 4 of us then." 5, Dr. Boone added reluctantly. "I'm not much for fighting, but I can load weapons, keep watch, do whatever else is needed." Wyatt felt something shift in the room, some intangible change in the air. This wasn't an army. It was a collection of frightened, damaged people who'd finally found the courage to stop running. But sometimes that was enough. Sometimes courage was all you had, and you either used it or spent the rest of your life wishing you had. They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Jacob rode back to his ranch to collect supplies and spread word to other small ranchers who might be sympathetic. Ruth and Dr. Boone inventoried the boarding house. What could be used as weapons, which rooms were most defensible, where they could store food and water in case of a siege. Elena rested, her energy fading as shock wore off and pain reasserted itself. Wyatt checked his ammunition, cleaned his guns, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Around 2 in the afternoon, the telegraph operator's son came running to the boarding house, out of breath and wide-eyed. "Mr. Sterling, Pa says you got responses to your telegrams already." They hurried to the telegraph office, the boy leading the way. The operator looked even more nervous than before, sweating despite the cool air. 3 responses, he said, pushing papers across the counter. All came within the last hour. The first was from the marshal's office in Denver, acknowledging receipt of his message, stating an investigation would be opened pending review of evidence. Estimated response time 3 to 6 weeks. Too long, Way too long. The second was from Harrison, the neighboring rancher, brief and cautious, suggesting a meeting to discuss shared concerns about Crow's business practices, proposing neutral ground. That was more promising. An ally with resources and local knowledge could be valuable. The third telegram made Wyatt pause. It was from an office he hadn't contacted, the territorial governor's office. The message was cryptic. Aware of Silas Crow, stop. Ongoing investigation. Stop. Exercise caution. Stop. Cannot discuss details. Stop. There's already an investigation? Ruth said, reading over his shoulder. Apparently, though why they'd be investigating him in secret, Wyatt stopped, understanding dawning. Unless they think he's connected to something bigger, something that requires careful handling. Or unless someone high up is protecting him, Dr. Boone suggested darkly. The telegraph operator cleared his throat. There's, one more thing. Silas came by about an hour ago. Read all the responses. He knows what you're doing. How did he? Wyatt caught himself. Of course Silas had read them. The operator was in his pocket. Everything Wyatt sent or received would go straight to Silas within minutes. He'd known that when he sent the telegrams, had counted on it, actually. But having it confirmed still left a sour taste. What did he say? Wyatt asked. Said you were making this personal. Said he'd tried to be reasonable, but you weren't giving him any choice. The operator's voice dropped. He looked calm. Too calm. That scared me more than if he'd been raging. When Silas gets that calm, people tend to die. They walked back to the boarding house in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The street was quieter now, people hurrying about their business, not lingering. The sense of impending violence hung over Black Hollow like storm clouds. At the boarding house, Jacob had returned with supplies, extra ammunition, some food supplies, a second rifle. He'd also brought news. Talked to 5 ranchers on my way back. 3 refused to get involved, said they got families to protect. Can't blame them, really. He unpacked the supplies onto Ruth's kitchen table. But 2 others might be willing to help. Small operators like me. They've got their own grudges against Silas. Might not fight openly, but they could provide supplies, shelter if needed, maybe testimony if this goes to trial. That's something, Wyatt said. It's not much. And I got other news too. Silas sent riders out this morning. Not just his regular hands. He's calling in favors from criminal contacts, gunslingers, outlaws, the kind of men who kill for money and don't ask questions. Word is he's offering $500 to anyone who brings you in, dead or alive. $500. That was serious money, the kind of bounty that would attract desperate men from 3 territories over. When? Wyatt asked. Soon. Tomorrow, maybe. Once the hired guns arrive and Silas has his numbers, he'll move. Probably won't wait much longer than that. Ruth sank into a chair. One day. We have one day to prepare for war. Then we better not waste it, Wyatt said. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, transforming the boarding house into something resembling a fortress. It wasn't much. Frontier construction wasn't built for defense. But they did what they could. Barricaded the lower windows with furniture and boards. Set up observation posts with clear sight lines to the street. Moved water and supplies to the upper floor. Created fallback positions in case the first floor was breached. Elena helped despite her injuries, her movements careful but determined. She knew the house's layout, knew which walls were sturdy and which would collapse under pressure. She worked beside Ruth and the others, saying little but contributing much. As darkness fell, they gathered in the kitchen one last time. Tomorrow would bring violence. They all knew it. The only questions were how bad it would be and who would survive it. I want to thank you all, Wyatt said quietly. You didn't have to do this. Any of you could have walked away, protected yourselves. You chose to stand instead. That takes courage. Courage or stupidity, Jacob said with a grim smile. Time will tell which. Either way, Ruth added, we're in it now. Together. Dr. Boone raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To Black Hollow's most foolish defenders, may we surprise ourselves with how well we do. They drank to that, coffee instead of whiskey, in a kitchen that smelled like gun oil and fear and something else. Hope, maybe. The desperate kind that came from having nothing left to lose. Wyatt took first watch, sitting by an upstairs window with his rifle across his knees. The street below was dark, quiet, empty of movement. But he could feel them out there, Silas's men, watching, waiting. The hired guns arriving, drawn by bounty money and the promise of easy violence. Somewhere in that darkness, Silas Crow was planning his attack, gathering his forces, preparing to crush this rebellion before it could spread. Wyatt checked his ammunition again. 6 shots in the rifle, 12 in his revolver, more boxes within reach. Not enough for a prolonged battle, but enough to make a stand. Enough to buy time for help that might never arrive. He thought about Iron Ridge, about his ranch, and the life he'd built there. Thought about riding back, pretending none of this had happened. It would be easy, safer, saner. But then he thought about Elena's face when she'd whispered, "Help me." Thought about Ruth's quiet defiance, Jacob's old courage, Dr. Boone's reluctant honor. Thought about all the people who'd suffered under Silas's rule because no one had ever stood in his way. The frontier was a brutal place, always had been. Men like Silas thrived here because there was room to be brutal, space to build empires on the broken backs of the powerless. The law was distant, justice was slow, and silence was survival. But silence had its own cost. Wyatt was learning that. The cost of looking away, of accepting cruelty as inevitable, of choosing safety over what was right. He'd been paying that cost since Caroline died, building wealth while ignoring the emptiness inside. Maybe stopping Silas wouldn't fill that emptiness. Probably wouldn't, if he was being honest. But at least when he looked in a mirror, he'd see someone who'd tried, someone who'd stood when it mattered. That had to count for something. Dawn would bring fire and blood and consequences. But tonight, in the darkness of Black Hollow, 5 people who'd found their courage sat watch over one pregnant woman who'd asked for help. And for now, tonight, that was enough. The attack came at dawn, but not the way Wyatt expected. He'd been awake for hours, watching the street from his post by the window. His eyes burned from exhaustion, his back ached from sitting in the same position, and his coffee had gone cold sometime around 4 in the morning. Below, Black Hollow remained dark and still, buildings crouched like sleeping animals in the pre-dawn gray. Then he heard the horses. Not a thundering charge or the dramatic approach of armed riders, just the steady clip-clop of hooves on hard-packed dirt, moving at a leisurely pace down the main street. Wyatt leaned forward, peering through the gap in the boarded window. 6 riders. Moving in formation, spread out to cover the width of the street. They weren't hurrying, weren't trying to hide. This was a show of force, deliberate and calculated. In the center rode Silas Crow, sitting tall in his saddle, dressed like he was heading to a business meeting rather than a confrontation. They stopped 50 yards from the boarding house, just sat there on their horses, waiting. Wyatt moved quickly but quietly through the house, waking the others. Within minutes, they'd all assembled on the second floor. Ruth rubbing sleep from her eyes, Dr. Boone looking pale and frightened, Jacob checking his rifle with practiced efficiency, and Elena standing near the back wall, one hand protective over her belly. "What do they want?" Ruth whispered. "Nothing good," Wyatt replied. He positioned himself at the window where he could be seen, made sure his rifle was visible. A message of his own. "Stay back from the windows. If shooting starts, get to the back rooms." "Mr. Sterling?" Silas's voice carried clearly in the morning stillness. "I know you're in there. Come on out. Let's talk like civilized men." Wyatt didn't respond immediately. He was counting riders, assessing weapons, looking for angles of attack. The 6 men all carried rifles, had pistols at their hips. They were positioned with clear sight lines to the boarding house, but also exposed on the open street. Not an attack formation. Not yet. "What do you want, Crow?" Wyatt called back. "What I've wanted from the beginning. My wife returned. My property respected. And you out of my town before this gets uglier than it needs to be."
"Elena's not going anywhere with you. She's carrying my child. That makes her my concern. The only thing concerning about you is how you haven't been arrested yet," Wyatt shot back. "But that's coming. I've contacted federal authorities. They're very interested in your activities here."
Silas laughed, and the sound was genuinely amused.
"Federal authorities? Son, I've been dodging federal authorities for longer than you've been building your little cattle empire. They move slow, get distracted easy, and can usually be convinced to look the other way with the right incentive. You think a few telegrams are going to bring them running? You're more naive than I thought. Maybe. But those telegrams are now on record. Anything happens to me or anyone in this house, they'll know exactly where to look."
That's assuming anyone cares enough to look. You're not as important as you think you are, Sterling. Rich? Sure. Successful in your own territory. But here? You're nobody. Just another stranger who stuck his nose where it didn't belong. The other riders were shifting in their saddles, hands resting on weapons, waiting for a signal. Wyatt could feel the tension building, that electric moment before violence erupted. I'm giving you one last chance, Silas continued. Walk away. Get on your fancy horse, ride back to Iron Ridge, and forget you ever heard of Black Hollow. Do that, and I'll let you live. Hell, I'll even throw in a good price on those cattle you came here to buy. Business is business, after all. And Elena? Elena learns the consequences of her choices. That's between her and me. That's what I thought you'd say. Wyatt's finger moved to rest near the trigger of his rifle. Here's my counteroffer. You turn yourself in to proper authorities. Face justice for what you've done. Elena stays under my protection until she decides otherwise. You do that, and maybe you live long enough to stand trial. The street went very quiet. Even the morning birds seemed to stop singing. When Silas spoke again, all pretense of civility was gone. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Sterling. I tried to be reasonable, tried to give you a way out, but you want to play hero? Fine. Let's see how that works out for you. He raised his hand and Wyatt tensed, ready for gunfire. But instead of attacking, Silas and his men simply turned their horses and rode away, disappearing down a side street. The silence they left behind was somehow worse than the confrontation. What just happened? Dr. Boone asked, his voice shaking slightly. He wanted us to know he could reach us anytime he wants, Jacob said grimly. That was a message, a demonstration of power. He's telling us we're surrounded, outgunned, and living on borrowed time. So why didn't he attack? Ruth asked. Wyatt lowered his rifle, thinking, because he's waiting for something. More men, maybe. Or he wants us scared, wants us to make a mistake. Scared people do stupid things. Well, it's working, Dr. Boone muttered. I'm terrified. Elena moved to the window, looked out at the empty street. He won't wait long. Silas doesn't have patience, never did. He'll want this over before outside help can arrive. How well do you know his tactics? Wyatt asked. Well enough. I watched him run that ranch for 3 years, watched him deal with problems. He likes to hurt people where they're weakest, goes after family, businesses, anything people care about, makes examples that everyone can see. So he'll target the boarding house directly? Maybe. Or he'll go after your allies first. Jacob, your ranch is isolated. Ruth, you've got other boarders here, people who could be threatened. Dr. Boone, your practice depends on the town trusting you. Silas will look for the easiest way to break your resistance. It was smart analysis, delivered in a flat, emotionless voice that suggested Elena had spent a long time studying the man who hurt her, learning his patterns, trying to predict his violence so she could survive it. Then we shore up the weak points, Wyatt said. Jacob, can your ranch hands be trusted? The 2 I've got are good men, but they've got families in town. Silas threatens their kids, they'll fold. Can't blame them for that. What about your other boarders? Wyatt asked Ruth. Are they safe? Ruth's face paled. I've got 3 others staying here, an elderly couple and a traveling salesman. They're all still asleep upstairs. I didn't want to frighten them. They need to leave, today. Get them out of Black Hollow if possible. Anyone connected to this house becomes a target. They spent the next hour evacuating Ruth's other guests. The elderly couple took the news badly. The wife started crying. The husband demanded explanations no one could give. The salesman just grabbed his belongings and practically ran out the door, mumbling about crazy frontier towns and never coming back. Within 90 minutes, the boarding house was empty except for the 5 defenders and Elena. The quiet that followed felt ominous. Around 8 in the morning, Jacob went out to scout the town and gather information. He was back within an hour, his face grim. Silas has been busy. He's got men posted at every entrance to town. No one gets in or out without his say-so. He's also spreading word that anyone who helps you will be considered an enemy. People are scared. Businesses are closing early. Families are keeping their children inside. He's putting the town under siege, Ruth said. Worse, he's turning Black Hollow into his own private army base. And there's more. Jacob pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. This was posted on the sheriff's office door. Wyatt unfolded it. The message was handwritten but clear.
Wyatt Sterling is wanted for assault, kidnapping, and conspiracy against Black Hollow's peace. Any citizen who provides information leading to his capture will receive $100 reward. Any citizen who provides shelter or aid will be considered an accomplice and dealt with accordingly. By order of Silas Crow, Acting Peace Officer. Acting Peace Officer? Dr. Boone read over Wyatt's shoulder. He can't just declare himself. He can if the sheriff lets him, Jacob interrupted, which apparently he did. Signed a deputization form this morning, giving Silas temporary law enforcement authority during this crisis. Wyatt crumpled the paper in his fist. That's not legal. Sheriffs can't just hand over their authority.
Legal doesn't matter when you own everyone who enforces the law, Ruth said bitterly. Silas has been working toward this for years. Now he's got exactly what he wanted, official justification for whatever he does next.
The implications settled over them like fog. Silas wasn't just a violent rancher anymore. He was, on paper at least, a law enforcement officer. That changed everything. Resisting him could now be framed as resisting legal authority. Killing him could be called murdering a peace officer. He just put legal weight behind his brutality.
He's been planning this, Elena said quietly. This wasn't reactive. He knew exactly what he'd do if someone ever challenged him. He's just been waiting for an excuse. A knock at the back door made everyone jump. Hands went to weapons, bodies tensed. Ruth moved carefully to the door, peered through the crack. It's the telegraph operator's son, alone. She opened the door. The boy, he couldn't have been more than 14, stood there looking absolutely terrified, holding a piece of paper. Mr. Sterling, I got a message for you. Pa said not to come, said it was too dangerous, but I thought you should know. Wyatt took the telegram. It was from the territorial governor's office, longer than the previous one. Investigation of Silas Crow suspended pending review. Stop. Cease all accusations and interference immediately. Stop. Federal authority will not intervene in local disputes. Stop. You are advised to leave Black Hollow. Stop. Wyatt read it 3 times, feeling something cold settle in his chest. They're backing off. Someone got to them. Or Silas has protection higher up than we thought, Jacob said. Either way, we're on our own. The boy shifted nervously. There's more. Silas sent a message, too. Said to tell you he's coming at sundown. Said you've got until then to surrender or prepare for consequences. Sundown, Wyatt repeated. That gave them maybe 8 hours. Thank you for bringing this. You should go home now. Stay inside. Whatever happens tonight, keep your head down. The boy nodded and ran off, disappearing between buildings like a frightened rabbit. Dr. Boone sank into a chair. We're not going to survive this. You all know that, right? Silas has deputized himself, shut down outside help, and now he's got legal cover to do whatever he wants. We're 5 people in a boarding house against an army with the law on their side. Then we make noise, Wyatt said. Loud enough that someone outside Black Hollow hears it and asks questions. How? He's cut off all the roads. The telegraph operator won't send anything Silas doesn't approve. There are other ways to communicate. Wyatt was thinking fast, running through options. Smoke signals could work if we had someone positioned to see them, or we could try to get someone through the blockade with a message. No one's getting through those checkpoints, Jacob said flatly. Silas has loyal men at every exit. They'll stop anyone they don't recognize. Ruth stood abruptly. Then they need to recognize them. What about the mail coach? It comes through every Tuesday. That's today. Silas can't stop the mail without causing problems with federal postal authorities. You think he cares about postal authorities when he's already defying territorial governors? Maybe not, but the mail driver, Jeremiah, he's been running this route for 20 years. He doesn't work for Silas, doesn't live in Black Hollow. He's got no reason to cooperate with this siege. If we could get a message to him, the mail station's on the far side of town, Dr. Boone interrupted. Past at least 2 of Silas's checkpoints. How would we even reach it? They all looked at each other, the impossibility of the situation pressing down like a physical weight. Every option seemed blocked, every avenue of help cut off. Silas had spent 15 years building his power structure, and now he was activating all of it at once. They were watching a trap close with brutal efficiency. Elena spoke up from her position near the wall. I could go. Everyone turned to stare at her. Absolutely not, Wyatt said immediately. You can barely walk, you're pregnant, it's suicide. Exactly why it might work. Silas's men know me. They won't see me as a threat. And if I tell them I'm trying to get away from you, trying to go back to Silas, they might let me through. And then what? You think they'll just let you mail a letter exposing everything? No. But I could create a distraction, get their attention focused on me while someone else gets the message through. Or I could hide a letter in my clothes, give it to Jeremiah when they're not looking. It's too dangerous, Ruth said firmly. You're in no condition. I'm in no condition to sit here waiting to die either. Elena's voice was stronger now, more certain. You all risked everything for me. Let me do something to help. By walking back into Silas's hands? By doing what needs to be done. I've spent 3 years being helpless, being a victim. Maybe I can't fight with guns or fists, but I can do this. I can use what they think about me, that I'm weak, that I'm broken, that I'll eventually come crawling back. I can use that against them. Wyatt wanted to argue more, but he could see the determination in Elena's face. She'd made her choice, and the terrible truth was, she might be right. A pregnant woman stumbling through town would draw sympathy, maybe confusion, but not the immediate violence that any of the rest of them would face. If you do this, he said carefully, you need to be smart about it. Plan every step. Have a story that makes sense. I'll say you threatened me, said you were going to use me as a hostage against Silas, that I waited until you were distracted and escaped out a back window. They'll believe that. It fits what they expect from me. Jacob was nodding slowly. The mail coach usually arrives around noon. That gives us 3 hours to prepare. We'd need to write the message, something that explains the situation clearly. Names, dates, specific accusations. And we'd need it in code, Dr. Boone added, in case Silas's men search her or intercept Jeremiah before he can leave town. They spent the next 2 hours crafting the message. It was part letter, part legal document, laying out everything they knew about Silas Crow. The violence against Elena and others, the suspicious deaths, the economic manipulation, the corruption of local law enforcement. Wyatt signed it, added his credentials, included references that federal authorities could verify. Then they encoded it. Nothing fancy. They didn't have time for elaborate ciphers. Just a simple substitution that would look like business correspondence if someone glanced at it quickly. Enough to get it past a casual inspection. Elena memorized the plan. She'd leave through the back door, make her way through the alleys to the main street. Once there, she'd stage a stumbling, desperate appearance, a pregnant woman fleeing captivity. Silas's men would stop her, probably take her to their checkpoint. She'd cry, beg to see Silas, act traumatized. While they were deciding what to do with her, Jeremiah's mail coach would arrive. In the confusion, she'd find a way to slip the letter to him, maybe hide it in his mailbag. After that, she'd have to play it by ear. It was a terrible plan. Too many things could go wrong. But it was the only plan they had. At 11:30, Elena prepared to leave. Ruth had found her a shawl to wear over her torn dress, something that would hide the letter tucked against her skin. Dr. Boone checked her injuries one more time, made sure she was steady enough to walk the distance. Are you sure about this? Wyatt asked her quietly, away from the others. Elena nodded. I'm sure. For the first time in 3 years, I'm doing something instead of having things done to me. Even if this fails, even if I don't make it, at least I tried. That matters. If anything goes wrong, if you feel threatened, if the plan falls apart, you run, you understand? You forget about the letter and you run. Where would I run to? Silas owns this town, but I appreciate the thought. She touched his arm briefly. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for everything, for seeing me as a person worth saving. Not many people have done that in my life. Wyatt didn't trust himself to respond. He just nodded, stepped back, let her move toward the door. They watched from the upstairs window as Elena made her way through the back garden, slipped between 2 buildings, and disappeared from view. For several long minutes, there was nothing. Just silence and tension and the awful feeling of having sent someone into danger with no way to help if things went wrong. Then faintly, they heard shouting. Men's voices, surprised and aggressive. The sound of Elena's voice raised in distress. Words indistinct but tone clear. She was playing her part, selling the story of desperate escape. That's the checkpoint on Palmer Street, Jacob said, identifying the location by sound. 3 men stationed there usually. They'll take her to Silas or hold her until he arrives. More shouting, closer now. They'd moved her, were bringing her toward the main street. Wyatt strained to see, but the angle was wrong, the buildings blocking his view. Then, clear as a bell, the sound of a coach approaching. Jeremiah's mail delivery, right on schedule. The familiar creak of wheels, the steady rhythm of horses that had made this journey 1,000 times. "Come on," Ruth whispered, though Elena couldn't possibly hear her. "Come on." The minutes stretched out like hours. Wyatt found himself barely breathing, every muscle tense, waiting for gunfire or screams or some sign that the plan had collapsed. But there was only the normal sounds of a town going about its business, overlaid with the occasional bark of orders from Silas's men and the distant rumble of the mail coach. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they heard the coach leaving. The same steady rhythm, pulling away from town, heading east toward the next settlement. Jeremiah's route, unchanged, uninterrupted. Had Elena succeeded? Had she managed to slip the letter to him? Or had she been caught, the message discovered, the whole thing for nothing? They wouldn't know. Not for hours, maybe days. The mail coach wouldn't reach the next town until tomorrow. Even if Jeremiah delivered the letter to authorities there, it would take time for them to respond, to investigate, to do anything meaningful. Time they probably didn't have. "Now what?" Dr. Boone asked. "Now we wait," Wyatt said, "and prepare for sundown." But preparation felt hollow when they all knew how outmatched they were. Wyatt counted their ammunition again, still not enough for a prolonged fight. Checked the barricades, sturdy but not bulletproof. Reviewed their defensive positions, adequate for a few attackers, useless against the force Silas could bring. Around 2 p.m, a young boy approached the boarding house, walking up the main street openly, hands empty and raised. Wyatt watched from the window as the kid stopped 50 feet away. "Mr. Sterling, I got a message from Mr. Crow." "What is it?" Wyatt called back. "He says to tell you he's got Elena. Says she came back to him like she always does. Says to tell you your plan didn't work, and now he's going to make an example of her. He wants you to watch." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Elena had failed, or been betrayed, or maybe the plan had never had a chance from the start. He says if you want to see her live through the night, you'll come to the town square at sundown. Come alone, unarmed, ready to surrender. Otherwise, Elena dies slow, and you get to hear her screaming all the way from here. The boy delivered the message mechanically, like he'd memorized it, then turned and ran before anyone could respond. Ruth made a small sound of distress. Dr. Boone looked like he might be sick. Jacob just shook his head slowly, the gesture of a man who'd seen this outcome coming and hoped to be wrong. "It's a trap," Wyatt said, though everyone already knew that. "He wants me in the open, vulnerable. Probably plans to kill me in front of the whole town as a lesson about what happens to outsiders who interfere." "So you're not going," Ruth said. It wasn't a question. Wyatt thought about Elena, about the courage it had taken for her to volunteer for a desperate plan. Thought about how she'd spent 3 years enduring Silas's brutality, finally found the strength to ask for help, and now was right back in his hands. Probably being hurt again, definitely being used as bait. "I have to go," he said quietly. "That's suicide." "Maybe, but leaving her to die alone is something I can't do." "You'll be giving Silas exactly what he wants," Jacob argued. "He kills you. This whole resistance collapses. Elena dies anyway, and the rest of us are next. Your death accomplishes nothing. My death buys time, makes Silas feel like he's won. Maybe in that window something changes. Help arrives. People find courage. Something." "That's a fantasy," Ruth said harshly. "Help isn't coming. We all know it. The only question is whether we die fighting here or get picked off one by one after Silas kills you." She was right. Wyatt knew she was right. But the thought of not going, of letting Elena face whatever Silas had planned alone, felt like a betrayal worse than death. "There might be another way," Dr. Boone said slowly. Everyone turned to look at him. "What if we don't give Silas what he expects? What if instead of Wyatt walking into a trap alone, we all go? Make it a public confrontation. Silas wants to make an example in the town square? Fine. Let's turn it into a trial. Let's make him answer for his crimes in front of everyone." "He's not going to stand trial," Jacob said. "He's got the guns, the men, the power. Why would he submit to a trial?" "Because he wants to look legitimate. That's why he had himself deputized, why he's been framing this as law enforcement rather than just violence. He cares about appearances. If we challenge him publicly, force him to either defend himself or look like a coward,
It might create enough chaos that
That what? Wyatt interrupted. That people suddenly grow spines and turn on him? You said yourself, Black Hollow's been beaten down for 15 years. One dramatic speech isn't going to change that. Maybe not, but it might plant seeds, might make a few people question, might create enough doubt that when federal authorities eventually do investigate, they find witnesses willing to talk.
it was still a long shot. Everything was a long shot at this point, but Wyatt could see the logic in it. Going alone meant certain death and probably accomplished nothing. Going together, turning Silas's show of power into something else entirely, at least gave them a chance to change the narrative. What about weapons? Ruth asked. He said to come unarmed. We come unarmed openly, but we position people in buildings around the square, riflemen who can cover us if things go wrong. It's not much, but it's something. Who would we get to do that? Everyone in town's too scared. The ranchers I talked to yesterday, Jacob said, the ones who were sympathetic. They might be willing to take that risk if they can do it from concealment. They've got their own grievances with Silas. This might be their chance too. They spent the remaining hours preparing. Jacob rode out again, taking back routes and avoiding checkpoints, reaching the two sympathetic ranchers and explaining the plan. Both agreed to position themselves in buildings overlooking the town square. It wasn't an army, just two men with rifles, but it was better than nothing. Ruth and Dr. Boone worked on what they'd say, how they'd frame the accusations. It needed to be specific, documented, damning. They compiled a list of names, victims, witnesses, people who disappeared or died suspiciously, added dates where they could, details that could be verified, built a case in words since they didn't have one in legal authority. Wyatt checked his gun one more time, even though he wouldn't be carrying it openly. He tucked a small Derringer in his boot, a backup weapon that might be missed in a quick search. It held 2 shots, not enough to fight his way out of anything, but enough to make a last stand if it came to that. As the sun moved toward the western horizon, painting Black Hollow in shades of orange and red, they gathered in Ruth's kitchen one final time.
This is probably the end, Dr. Boone said quietly. I think we should acknowledge that. Silas has been planning this confrontation all day. He'll have thought through every contingency. Our chances of walking away from that square are close to 0. Probably, Wyatt agreed. So why are we doing this?
Because the alternative is living as the kind of people who don't, Ruth said. I'm 63 years old. I've lived a good life. If it ends tonight standing up to a bastard like Silas Crow, that's not the worst way to go. I've got no family left, Jacob added. Nothing to lose except time, and at my age that time's not worth much anyway. Might as well spend it doing something that matters.
Dr. Boone nodded slowly. I've been complicit for too long, fixed the damage while ignoring the cause. Maybe tonight I can finally do something useful. They looked at Wyatt, waiting for his contribution. I came to Black Hollow to buy cattle, he said. Instead, I found a town that had forgotten how to fight for itself. Maybe we lose tonight. Probably we do. But at least Black Hollow will remember that someone tried. Someone stood when it mattered. That has to mean something. At 5:45, they left the boarding house, walked through the streets of Black Hollow openly, their heads up, their steps steady. People watched from windows and doorways, faces pale and frightened. No one spoke. No one offered support. But they watched. That was something. The town square was the open space at the center of Black Hollow, surrounded by buildings on 3 sides and open to the main street on the 4th. Normally it hosted market days and community gatherings. Tonight it was staging ground for an execution. Silas waited in the center, surrounded by at least 20 armed men. He'd set up a makeshift platform using wooden crates, elevating himself above the crowd. Elena sat on the ground beside the platform, her hands bound, her face bruised worse than before. She'd been beaten again. Recently. Around the square's perimeter, townspeople had gathered. Maybe 50 people, standing in small clusters, keeping their distance from Silas's men. They looked terrified but curious, drawn by the promise of violence the way people always were. Wyatt and his small group stopped at the edge of the square. Silas smiled down at them, the expression of a cat that had just cornered a mouse. Mr. Sterling, so glad you could join us. And you brought friends. How touching. Silas's voice carried across the square, pitched for the crowd. Did you bring what I asked for? Your surrender? Your weapons? We came to talk, Wyatt said, his voice equally loud. To give you a chance to answer for what you've done. Silas laughed. Answer for what? Being a successful rancher? Building a prosperous business? Maintaining order in a lawless territory? Answer for murder, for assault, for 15 years of terror and corruption. Wyatt pulled out the document they'd prepared, held it up so everyone could see. We've compiled a list, names, dates, witnesses. Rosa Hernandez, disappeared 1879. Margaret Dawson, disappeared 1881. Sheriff Walsh, found dead 1871 after investigating you. Elena Voss, beaten repeatedly throughout your marriage. Should I continue? The crowd stirred, whispers starting. Silas's smile never wavered, but something in his eyes went cold and flat. That's quite an accusation, he said softly. You have proof of any of this? We have witnesses. We have documentation. We have Elena, who can testify to years of abuse. You have nothing. Silas's voice cracked like a whip. You have hearsay and speculation from desperate people trying to avoid consequences for their own actions. Elena is a disturbed woman who tried to run away from her responsibilities. The others you mentioned? Accidents and tragedies, nothing more. 15 tragedies? All connected to you? I'm a prominent man in a dangerous territory. People die on the frontier, Sterling. That's not murder, that's life. Dr. Boone stepped forward. I've treated the injuries, documented them. Broken bones, internal bleeding, trauma consistent with sustained physical abuse. That's not life, that's criminal assault. That's a doctor seeing what he wants to see to justify his friend's criminal behavior, Silas countered smoothly. And speaking of criminal behavior, let's discuss yours, shall we? Breaking and entering, kidnapping, conspiracy, interference with legal law enforcement. That's me, in case you forgot. I have deputization papers signed by the county sheriff, which means you, all of you, are currently in violation of territorial law. He was good. Wyatt had to give him that. Silas was reframing everything, controlling the narrative, making himself the victim and them the criminals. And the crowd was listening, uncertain, unable to tell truth from manipulation. Where's the sheriff now? Ruth called out. If you're acting in legal capacity, where's the man who gave you that authority? Silas gestured, and the sheriff emerged from behind a building. He looked drunk or drugged or both, barely able to walk straight. Two of Silas's men supported him, held him upright. Sheriff Harris, do you confirm that I'm acting under proper deputization? The sheriff mumbled something that might have been yes. It was pathetic, a travesty of legal authority, but technically it checked the box Silas needed checked. There you have it, Silas announced. Official confirmation, which means, Mr. Sterling, you and your accomplices are under arrest for multiple violations of territorial law. You'll be held pending trial, and if convicted, you'll hang. Nice and legal. Everything by the book. His men started moving forward, forming a circle around Wyatt's group. This was it. The trap closing. They were about to be taken prisoner, separated, probably killed quietly before any trial could happen. Wyatt saw Elena trying to catch his eye, trying to tell him something. Her hands were bound, but her fingers were moving, pointing to something behind him, at the edge of the square. He glanced back carefully and felt his heart skip. More people had arrived. Not Silas's men. Regular townspeople, emerging from buildings and alleys. A dozen, then 2 dozen, then more. They weren't armed, weren't moving aggressively, just standing there, watching, bearing witness. And among them, Wyatt spotted the mail coach driver, Jeremiah, still in town. He nodded once at Wyatt, a tiny gesture. The letter had gotten through. He'd sent it. Now he'd come back to see what happened. You've got quite an audience, Silas, Wyatt called out. All these people watching you arrest unarmed citizens for the crime of speaking truth. Must make you feel powerful. They're watching justice being served, Silas replied, but there was an edge in his voice now. He'd noticed the growing crowd, too. This wasn't what he'd planned. He'd wanted a quick, brutal lesson with minimal witnesses. Instead, he was getting a public spectacle. Justice? Jacob stepped forward, his voice stronger than Wyatt had ever heard it. My daughter's fiancé died because he witnessed you beating a man half to death. That's not justice. That's murder. He was trampled by horses. He was killed to keep him quiet. We all know it. We've always known it. We just didn't have the courage to say it. More voices from the crowd now. An older woman. My son worked your ranch. You owed him 3 months' wages when he died in that accident. A man. You drove my brother out of business, then bought his property for nothing.
Another woman. My sister tried to report you for assault. The sheriff told her to keep quiet. The testimonies came faster now, overlapping, building on each other. Years of suppressed truth spilling out in the presence of witnesses, the crowd giving individuals courage they'd never had alone. Silas's face was darkening, rage building behind his composed exterior. Shut up. All of you shut up right now. But they didn't. The floodgates had opened. More people spoke up, some with specific accusations, others just expressing support. The whispers of 15 years becoming shouts in a single moment. I said, shut up! Silas drew his pistol, fired it into the air. The gunshot silenced everyone instantly. The crowd froze. Silas's men raised their own weapons, creating a bristling circle of iron and threat. This ends now, Silas said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Sterling, you're under arrest. You resist, you die. You submit, you stand trial. Choose. Wyatt looked around the square, at the crowd who'd finally found their voice, at Elena, battered but unbroken, at his friends who'd stood with him when they had every reason to run, at Silas, a monster whose power was built on fear and maintained through violence. And he realized something. The trial didn't matter. The arrest didn't matter. What mattered was this moment, this public breaking of silence, this demonstration that Silas could be challenged. Seeds, like Dr. Boone had said. They were planting seeds. I'll come with you, Wyatt said, but on one condition. You're in no position to make conditions. Release Elena. Let Dr. Boone take her somewhere safe. Let her have her baby away from all this. Do that, and I'll submit to arrest without resistance. That woman is my wife. That woman is a victim you've been torturing for 3 years. Let her go. Silas laughed, but it sounded forced now. Why would I do that? Because this crowd is watching. Because every person here just heard testimony about your crimes. Because federal authorities are already on their way. Yes, the letter got through. And when they arrive, they're going to ask questions. Every witness here will remember whether you showed mercy tonight or continued your brutality. Which version of events do you want them telling? It was a bluff built on partial truth, a gamble that Silas's need for public legitimacy would outweigh his desire for revenge. For a long moment, Silas just stared at him, calculating, weighing options. Then unexpectedly, Silas smiled. Fine. The woman means nothing to me anyway. She's used up, broken. Let her go birth her bastard in whatever hovel will take her. I'm done with her. He nodded to one of his men, who cut Elena's bonds. She stumbled, and Dr. Boone rushed forward to catch her. Ruth moved to help, and together they started guiding Elena away from the square. But Sterling stays, Silas continued, and so do his accomplices. All of you are under arrest. Drop your weapons and submit peacefully, or we start shooting. Your choice. The men with rifles closed in. Wyatt and the others had no choice but to comply, carefully placing their visible weapons on the ground. Silas's men moved in to search them, found Wyatt's Derringer, confiscated it with sneering amusement. Take them to the old warehouse on Miller Street, Silas ordered. Lock them up. Post guards. No one gets in or out without my personal authorization. As they were being led away at gunpoint, Wyatt looked back at the crowd. They were still there, still watching. And he could see it in some of their faces. Doubt, anger, the first stirrings of resistance. The silence had been broken. Whatever happened next, that couldn't be undone. The warehouse was exactly what it sounded like. A large, mostly empty building that had once stored grain before the operation moved to larger facilities. Now it held nothing but dust, shadows, and 4 prisoners. Silas's men threw them inside, slammed the door, and locked it from the outside. Through gaps in the wall boards, Wyatt could see guards being posted. At least 6 men, heavily armed, rotating watch. Well, Jacob said, sitting down on the dirty floor. That could have gone better. Could have gone worse too, Ruth countered. Elena's free. The town saw what happened. Word spreading. Word that will die with us when Silas decides he's done with this legal pretense and just puts bullets in our heads, Dr. Boone said flatly. He'd gone pale, the reality of their situation finally hitting him. He's not going to let us live long enough for any trial. We all know that. Wyatt walked the perimeter of the warehouse, checking for weaknesses. The building was old but solid. The door was reinforced. The windows were too high to reach without climbing and covered with bars. It was designed to keep people out but worked just as well for keeping people in.
So what's the plan? Jacob asked. We wait for rescue that's not coming? Try to overpower 6 armed guards with our bare hands? Make peace with our maker. We wait for nightfall, Wyatt said. Then we find a way out. Through what? The walls are solid, the door's locked, and even if we got out, we'd have to fight through guards and then escape a town Silas controls completely. I know, but sitting here waiting to die isn't a plan I'm interested in. They waited as evening turned to night. Through the gaps in the walls, they watched the light fade, heard the sounds of Black Hollow settling into uneasy sleep. Guards changed shifts outside. Voices murmured, too low to hear clearly. The smell of tobacco smoke drifted through the cracks. Around midnight, they heard a new sound. Horses, lots of them, arriving fast. Voices raised in greeting. Through a gap, Wyatt could see new men arriving, the hired guns Silas had summoned, finally showing up. At least 20 more armed men, mercenaries and outlaws drawn by bounty money and the promise of easy violence. Tomorrow's going to be bad, Jacob said quietly. Silas has his army now. He'll probably execute us at dawn, stage it as some kind of official proceeding. Then we move tonight, Wyatt said, before dawn, before he's ready. Move how? We're locked in a warehouse with guards outside. Wyatt had been working on the problem for hours, examining every inch of their prison. The building was solid, but old. Years of settling had created gaps in the floorboards, and beneath those floorboards was earth, soft earth. We dig, he said. Dig? With what? Wyatt pulled off his belt, showed them the metal buckle. With this. With our hands. With whatever we can find. We tunnel under the wall, come up outside the guard perimeter. That'll take hours, maybe days. Then we better start now. It was desperate, probably impossible, but it was something. They cleared a spot in the corner farthest from the door, pried up floorboards as quietly as they could, and started digging. The earth was hard-packed, but not impossible to break through. They took turns, working in shifts, muffling the sounds as best they could. Hours passed. Their hands were bleeding, their muscles screaming, but slowly, painfully, a tunnel began to form. Not big, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through, but it was progress. Hope measured in handfuls of dirt. By 4 a.m, they'd dug maybe 6 feet, not enough to clear the building's foundation, let alone reach beyond the guards. But it was a start, and starts could become escapes if you were desperate enough. Then, without warning, the warehouse door slammed open. Silas stood there, flanked by armed men, holding a lantern that cast harsh shadows across his face. He looked at the disturbed floor, at their dirt-covered hands and faces, and smiled. Going somewhere, Sterling? Wyatt got to his feet slowly, dirt falling from his hands, every muscle in his body screaming from hours of digging. The lantern light made Silas's shadow stretch across the warehouse floor like something demonic, all elongated limbs and distorted angles. Thought you'd tunnel out like rats, Silas said, stepping into the warehouse. His men fanned out behind him, rifles pointed at the prisoners. Got to admit, I'm almost impressed. Most men in your position would have just sat there crying and praying, but you actually tried something. Why are you here? Wyatt asked. His voice came out hoarse, his throat dry from hours of breathing dust. Come to gloat before the execution? Execution? Silas laughed. Oh, Sterling, you misunderstand. I'm not going to execute you. That would make you a martyr. Give people something to rally around. No, I've got something much better planned. He gestured, and his men moved forward, grabbing Wyatt and the others, dragging them out of the warehouse. The pre-dawn air was cold, sharp enough to sting lungs. The street was empty except for Silas's men, maybe 30 of them now, the hired guns mixed with his regular ranch hands. All armed, all watching with the dead-eyed stare of men who'd long ago stopped caring about right and wrong. Where are you taking us? Ruth demanded, struggling against the hands that held her. To witness the consequences of your actions, Silas replied. He was in a good mood, Wyatt realized, almost jovial. That was worse than rage. Men like Silas were most dangerous when they were enjoying themselves. They were marched through Black Hollow's dark streets, past buildings where families slept or pretended to sleep, past the empty town square, past the boarding house where this had all started. Finally, they stopped in front of a small house at the edge of town. Wyatt recognized it immediately. Dr. Boone's office and home. Lights were on inside. Shadows moved behind the curtains. Elena's in there, Wyatt said, understanding flooding through him. You bastard! You said you'd let her go! I said Dr. Boone could take her somewhere safe. I never said I wouldn't visit. Silas walked up to the door, knocked politely. Dr. Boone, oh wait, he's right here with us. Well, I'll just let myself in then. He kicked the door open. The crash of splintering wood echoed through the quiet street. Inside, Elena sat in a chair near the fireplace, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up as Silas entered, and the fear that flooded her face was visceral, total. Beside her, Ruth's elderly boarder, the woman who'd left yesterday, stood protectively, holding a fire poker like a weapon. Please, the old woman said, her voice shaking. She's with child. She's injured. Leave her be. Get out, Silas said calmly. This doesn't concern you. I won't leave her alone with you. Silas didn't argue. He just nodded to one of his men, who grabbed the old woman and dragged her outside, throwing her roughly into the street. She landed hard, crying out in pain. Anyone else want to play hero? Silas asked the room. No one else was there. Just Elena, alone and trapped.
Silas, please, Elena said, and Wyatt hated hearing that pleading tone in her voice, hated that she'd been broken down so thoroughly that begging was her first instinct. I'll do whatever you want, just don't hurt anyone else. This is between us. Oh, it stopped being between us when you ran, when you made me look weak in front of my own town. Silas walked slowly toward her, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. You know what happens to wives who embarrass their husbands, Elena. We've had this conversation before. Outside, Wyatt struggled against the men holding him. Crow, you want someone to hurt me. Leave her alone. Why would I do that? Hurting her hurts you more. You care about her, don't you, Sterling? Thought you could save her, make yourself feel better about whatever failures haunt you at night. Well, watch what happens to the people you try to save. Silas grabbed Elena by the hair, yanked her to her feet. She screamed, one hand going to his wrist, the other protective over her swollen belly. Stop, Dr. Boone shouted, finding his voice. She's pregnant. The baby that's probably not even mine? You think I care about that? Silas's voice was rising now, the calm facade cracking to reveal the rage underneath. I gave her everything, a home, a name, a place in this territory, and she repays me by whoring around, getting pregnant, and trying to run. Elena tried to speak, but Silas backhanded her across the face, the sound sharp and ugly in the small room. That was when Wyatt stopped thinking strategically and just moved. He slammed his head backward into the face of the man holding him, felt cartilage crunch, felt the grip loosen. He spun, drove his elbow into another man's throat, grabbed the rifle from his hands as he fell choking. For about 3 seconds, Wyatt was free and armed. Then something hit him from behind. A rifle butt to the kidneys that sent white-hot pain exploding through his body. He went down hard, the weapon torn from his hands. Hold him, Silas ordered calmly. And if he tries that again, break his legs. Rough hands hauled Wyatt upright, held him so tightly he could barely breathe. Through watering eyes, he saw Silas turn back to Elena, saw her huddled on the floor, blood running from her nose. You see, Sterling, this is what happens. You made her think she could defy me, made her think some rich stranger would actually protect her. But here we are, right back where we started. Her on the floor, me in control, and you powerless to stop any of it. Silas reached down, grabbed Elena's arm, started dragging her toward the door. She fought, kicking and clawing, but she was injured and pregnant and exhausted. No match for his strength. Where are you taking her? Ruth cried out. Back to my ranch. Where she belongs. Where she'll stay until that baby's born. And then, Silas shrugged. Accidents happen during childbirth, tragic but common, especially for women in poor health. He was going to kill her, not today, not in front of witnesses, but soon, as soon as he could make it look natural. Wyatt could see it in his eyes, hear it in the casual way he discussed her death. You won't get away with this, Jacob said, his old voice strong. People saw what happened in the square. They heard the testimony. Federal authorities are coming. Federal authorities? Silas laughed. You mean the letter your friend tried to slip to the mail driver? The one my men found when they searched his coach before letting him leave town? That letter? The bottom dropped out of Wyatt's stomach. The letter hadn't gotten through. Their last hope, their final attempt at calling for help, had been intercepted. Jeremiah cooperated very quickly once we explained his options,
Silas continued. Gave up the letter, told us everything about your little plan. He's on his way to the next town now, with strict instructions to forget everything he saw here. And the letter? I burned it. So no, Mr. Holt, no federal authorities are coming. No one's coming. You're alone, you've lost, and now you get to watch the consequences. He dragged Elena to the door. She was crying now, struggling weakly, looking back at Wyatt with desperate eyes. Let her go! Wyatt roared, fighting against his captors. Crow, you coward! Fight me yourself, not her! Me! You're not worth fighting, Sterling. You're just an object lesson, a demonstration of what happens to outsiders who interfere in Black Hollow's business. Silas reached the doorway, paused. But don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to think about your failures. I'm not killing you today. I'm letting you live with the knowledge that Elena's death is your fault. That every person who suffered because you stirred up false hope, that's on you. He pulled Elena outside. 2 of his men grabbed her from him, started dragging her toward horses tied nearby. And that was when the night exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, not the scattered shots of a skirmish, but concentrated rifle fire from concealed positions. 2 of Silas's men went down immediately, blood blooming on their chests. The others scattered, diving for cover, returning fire blindly into the darkness. Wyatt felt the hands holding him loosen as his captors reached for their weapons. He drove backward, breaking free, grabbed a fallen rifle, and rolled behind a water trough. More gunfire. The hired guns who'd been standing in loose formation were now pinned down, taking fire from at least 3 different directions. Someone had set up an ambush, had waited for exactly this moment. Through the confusion and gun smoke, Wyatt saw Jacob and Ruth and Dr. Boone breaking free, scrambling for cover. Saw Elena being dragged toward the horses, still held by 2 of Silas's men. Saw Silas himself drawing his pistol, firing at shadows. Fall back, Silas shouted. Get to the ranch. Move! His men started retreating in disorder, some carrying wounded, others just running. The ambushers kept up steady fire, not giving them time to regroup. It was professional, coordinated, not townspeople who'd suddenly found courage. This was something else. Wyatt aimed at the men holding Elena, squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. One of the men went down, clutching his leg. Elena wrenched free from the other, stumbled, and fell. Wyatt ran toward her, covering the distance in seconds that felt like hours. Bullets snapped through the air around him. Something tugged at his coat sleeve, a near miss. He reached Elena, grabbed her, started pulling her toward the cover of Dr. Boone's house. Go, go, go! Someone shouted from the darkness. A familiar voice, but Wyatt couldn't place it through the chaos. They made it to the house, crashed through the already open door. Inside, Dr. Boone was frantically gathering medical supplies. Ruth had found a rifle somewhere, was standing by a window, firing methodically at fleeing targets. Who's shooting? Wyatt gasped, trying to catch his breath. Who set up the ambush? I did. Wyatt spun. A woman stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the pre-dawn light. She was maybe 40, dressed in riding clothes, carrying a Winchester rifle with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. Behind her, Wyatt could see men taking up defensive positions, ranchers from the look of them, the neighbors Jacob had mentioned. Who are you? Wyatt asked. My name is Vivian Crow, the woman said, stepping into the light. Silas's first wife, the one everyone thinks is dead. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of horses. Silas's men retreating, regrouping, preparing for a second assault. You're supposed to be missing, Dr. Boone said, staring at her like she was a ghost. Silas said you went back east 15 years ago. Silas said a lot of things, most of them lies. Vivian moved to the window, looked out at the street where bodies lay and gun smoke still hung in the air. He tried to kill me in 1881, beat me, strangled me, left me for dead in a ravine. But I survived, barely. Took me 2 years to recover, another year to build a case, and 10 more years to get anyone to listen. A case, Wyatt said, against Silas, for attempted murder, fraud, theft. Turns out the ranch he built his empire on? He stole it, forged documents, murdered the real owner, took everything. Vivian's voice was hard, emotionless. The tone of someone who'd spent years turning pain into determination. I've been working with federal investigators, building evidence, finding witnesses. But Silas has protection, friends in high places. Every time we got close, the case fell apart. So what changed? Ruth asked. Your letter, the one you gave to Jeremiah. Vivian looked at Wyatt. He didn't betray you. He brought it straight to me. I've been staying in the next town over, waiting for the right moment. When I read what you'd documented, the witnesses you'd found, I knew this was our chance. Everything I'd been investigating, confirmed by independent sources. But Silas said... Silas lied. He's good at that. Vivian checked her rifle, reloaded with quick, efficient movements. I've got 12 men outside. Ranchers, former lawmen, a couple of federal deputies who finally got authorization to move. It's not an army, but it's enough to put up a fight. He's got 30 hired guns, Jacob said. Maybe more. And they're falling back to his ranch, which is built like a fortress. Then we don't give them time to fortify. We hit them now, while they're scattered and scared. Vivian looked around the room, at the exhausted, injured defenders. I know you've been through hell. I know you're tired, but this ends today. One way or another, Silas Crow's reign over Black Hollow is finished. Wyatt looked at Elena, who was pressed against the wall, eyes wide with shock. Looked at Ruth and Dr. Boone and Jacob, all of them bloodied and battered but still standing. Thought about the last 3 days, the violence and fear and desperate hope. What's your plan? He asked Vivian. We take the fight to him. Storm the ranch before he can fully organize his defenses. It'll be bloody. We'll lose people. But it's the only way to end this. That's suicide, Dr. Boone said. His ranch is defended, stocked with supplies. He could hold out for weeks. Not if we burn it, Vivian said calmly. Fire doesn't care about walls or guns, and Silas cares more about his property than his principles. He'll come out. And when he does, we take him. It was brutal, ruthless, probably illegal. Burning a man's home, even a criminal's, went beyond law enforcement into something darker. But Wyatt found he didn't care. Silas had built his empire on violence. Let it burn in violence, too. I'm in, he said. Me too, Jacob added immediately. Ruth nodded. Someone needs to keep you fools alive. Might as well be me. Dr. Boone looked at them all like they'd lost their minds. Maybe they had. But he still said, I'll stay here with Elena. Treat the wounded. Someone has to. Elena, Wyatt said, kneeling beside her. You'll be safe here. Dr. Boone will protect you. And when this is over, Kill him, Elena interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. I know that sounds wrong. I know I should want justice, trials, proper law, but I don't. I want him dead, for me, for Rosa, for everyone he's hurt. Make sure he doesn't walk away from this. Wyatt didn't promise, couldn't promise, but he nodded and Elena seemed to understand. They left as the sun was starting to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of red and gold that felt like a bad omen. Vivian's men had horses ready, rough frontier stock, not show animals, built for endurance and hard riding. Wyatt mounted up, feeling every bruise and scrape from the night's violence. The ride to Silas's ranch took 20 minutes, following a road that wound through scrubland and rocky outcrops. They pushed the horses hard, knowing speed mattered more than stealth now. Silas would be expecting them. The only question was whether he'd had time to prepare. The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. It was impressive, Wyatt had to admit. Main house built from stone and timber, large enough for a small hotel. Bunkhouse for the hands. Barn, stables, storage buildings. Corrals holding quality horses. The kind of spread that represented real wealth, built over years, and all of it soaked in blood and misery. There, Vivian pointed. Men were visible in the yard, taking up positions behind walls and water troughs. Maybe 20 of them, rifles ready. The rest must be inside the buildings, or had fled entirely. Not as many as we thought, Jacob observed. The hired guns probably ran when the ambush started, Vivian said. Mercenaries don't stick around for fights that go bad. It's probably mostly Silas's loyal men down there, true believers. Or people too scared to run, Ruth added. They dismounted behind the hill, out of rifle range. Vivian's men spread out, checking weapons, preparing for assault. They were a mixed group, old ranchers like Jacob, a couple of younger men with deputy badges, a few hard-faced individuals who looked like they'd seen their share of violence. We'll split into 3 groups, Vivian said, sketching a quick map in the dirt with a stick. One group hits from the front, draws their fire. Second group circles to the west, takes position near the barn. Third group goes east, sets fires in the outbuildings. Once the fires are going, Silas will have to choose: fight us or save his property. And if he chooses to fight, one of the deputies asked, then we kill anyone who shoots at us and arrest anyone who surrenders. This is a federal operation now. We've got jurisdiction, we've got cause, and we've got authority. She looked at each of them in turn. But make no mistake, this is going to get ugly. If you're not prepared for that, stay here. No one stayed. They split up. Wyatt went with Vivian's group heading west toward the barn. They moved quickly but carefully, using terrain for cover, staying low. The ranch hands on guard hadn't spotted them yet, were focused on the approach road. As they got closer, Wyatt could see the defensive preparations more clearly. Barrels stacked for cover, rifle positions set up at windows, horses saddled and ready for quick escape. Silas had built his fortress well, but stone didn't burn. Wood did. They reached the barn without being spotted, pressed against its western wall. The structure was old, dry, packed with hay and straw. Vivian pulled out a tin of matches, looked at Wyatt. Last chance to do this legal. We could wait for more federal authorities, try for a proper siege. How long would that take? Weeks, maybe months. Elena doesn't have months. Black Hollow doesn't have months. Wyatt looked at the barn, thought about everything that had happened, everyone who'd been hurt. Burn it. Vivian struck a match. The hay caught immediately, flames spreading with terrifying speed. Within seconds, the barn's interior was an inferno. Smoke poured out through gaps in the walls, thick and black. Shouts from the ranch yard. Men running, confusion spreading. The barn was adjacent to other structures. If the fire spread, the entire ranch could go up. Now! Vivian shouted. Her men opened fire from multiple positions. The ambush strategy again, catching Silas's forces while they were distracted. Men went down, others scrambled for cover. Return fire was scattered, uncoordinated. Wyatt aimed at a man behind a water trough, squeezed off a shot, missed, aimed again, breathed steady, fired. This time the man jerked backward, clutching his shoulder. The battle descended into chaos. Gunfire echoing across the ranch yard, smoke from the burning barn making it hard to see, men shouting orders and curses. Wyatt lost track of Vivian, lost track of time, just kept moving and shooting and trying not to get killed. A bullet spanged off the stone wall inches from his head. He dropped, rolled, came up behind a wagon. Two of Silas's men were advancing, using the smoke for cover. Wyatt waited until they were close, then stood and fired twice. Both men fell. His rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, drew his pistol, kept moving. The fire was spreading now, jumping from the barn to a storage shed, creeping toward the main house. Men were trying to fight it with buckets of water, a futile effort against flames that seemed alive and hungry. Through the smoke, Wyatt saw a figure standing on the main house porch. Silas, rifle in hand, surveying the destruction of his empire with something that looked like disbelief. Their eyes met across the chaos. Silas raised his rifle. So did Wyatt with his pistol. For a moment they just stood there, 50 yards apart, taking aim at each other through smoke and violence. Then Silas turned and ran back into the house. Wyatt ran after him, vaulting over fallen bodies and burning debris. He hit the porch at full speed, kicked the door open, ducked as a bullet tore through the space where his head had been. The house's interior was dark after the bright morning light, full of shadows and furniture that made perfect ambush points. Wyatt moved carefully, pistol raised, expecting Silas to appear from any direction. A shot rang out from upstairs. The bullet punched through the wall next to Wyatt, showering him with splinters. "You destroyed everything," Silas's voice coming from the second floor, shaking with rage. 15 years of building, and you destroyed it in 3 days. "You destroyed it yourself," Wyatt called back. "Built your empire on murder and cruelty. This was always how it had to end. I gave this territory order, structure. Without me, Black Hollow is nothing but another failed frontier settlement. Black Hollow's better off failed than living under your boot." Another shot, this one closer. Silas was moving, trying to get a better angle. Wyatt pressed against a wall, listening for footsteps, for breathing, for anything that would give away position. "Elena was right," Wyatt continued, trying to draw Silas out with words. "You're pathetic. A small man who needed to hurt people weaker than himself to feel powerful. I am powerful. I built this. I own... You own nothing. Your ranch is burning. Your men are dead or surrendering. Federal authorities have evidence of your crimes. It's over, Crow. You lost. Footsteps on the stairs, rapid and heavy. Silas appeared on the landing, rifle swinging toward Wyatt. Both men fired simultaneously. Wyatt felt something punch into his side, hot and sharp. Silas staggered, his rifle falling from his hands, a red stain spreading across his chest. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Silas's knees buckled, and he collapsed on the stairs, sliding down a few steps before stopping. Wyatt moved forward, keeping his pistol trained on the fallen man. Silas was still breathing, blood bubbling from his mouth, but the light in his eyes was fading. You killed me, Silas said, and he sounded genuinely surprised. Yeah, Wyatt replied. His side was on fire, blood soaking through his shirt. I did. Was supposed to be my town, my empire. It was a prison, and now it's free. Silas tried to say something else, but only blood came out. His eyes went glassy, fixed on something Wyatt couldn't see. Then he stopped breathing entirely. Wyatt stood there for a moment, looking at the dead man who'd caused so much suffering. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion and pain and the vague hope that this had been worth it. Footsteps behind him. Vivian entered the house, took in the scene, Silas dead on the stairs, Wyatt bleeding from a side wound. It's done? She asked. It's done. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Through the windows, Wyatt could see Silas's remaining men being rounded up, disarmed, zip-tied with leather strips. The barn had collapsed into itself, a pile of burning timber. The fire hadn't spread to the main house after all. Some of Vivian's men had contained it, created a firebreak. We need to get you to a doctor, Vivian said, moving to support Wyatt as he swayed. Dr. Boone's back in town. With Elena. Then that's where we're going. The ride back to Black Hollow was a blur of pain and exhaustion. Wyatt slumped in the saddle, only vaguely aware of Ruth and Jacob flanking him, keeping him upright. His shirt was soaked with blood. His vision kept swimming in and out of focus. They reached Dr. Boone's office to find a crowd gathered outside. Townspeople, dozens of them, standing in the street. When they saw Vivian and Wyatt and the others returning, a murmur went through the crowd. Silas? Someone called out. Dead, Vivian announced, along with his power over this town. It's over. The murmur became something louder. Not quite cheering, too much had been lost for celebration, but relief, clear and palpable. People had been holding their breath for 15 years. Finally, they could exhale. Dr. Boone met them at the door, took one look at Wyatt, and cursed. Get him inside, now. They carried Wyatt to the examination table. The doctor cut away his shirt, probed the wound with gentle but firm fingers. Bullet went through clean, missed vital organs. You're lucky, Sterling. Few inches to the left and we'd be planning a funeral. How's Elena? Wyatt managed to ask through gritted teeth. She's resting. The stress triggered early contractions, but they've stopped. She and the baby are stable. Dr. Boone started cleaning the wound, and Wyatt hissed at the sting of alcohol. She kept asking about you. Wanted to know if you were alive. Tell her it's over. Silas is dead. She's safe. Tell her yourself. She's in the next room. It took 2 hours for Dr. Boone to patch Wyatt up properly. Cleaning, stitching, bandaging. By the time he was done, Wyatt felt like he'd been stomped by a horse. Everything hurt. His side throbbed with every breath. His hands were still raw from digging in the warehouse. His body was one massive bruise. But he was alive. They all were somehow. Against odds that should have killed them multiple times over. He limped into the next room where Elena lay in a narrow bed. She looked fragile, her face pale except for the purple bruises. But when she saw him, something in her expression softened. You came back, she said. Of course I did. Silas? Dead. He won't hurt you again. Won't hurt anyone again. Elena closed her eyes, tears leaking from beneath her lids. Not sad tears, something else. Release, maybe. The kind of crying that came when pressure you'd been holding for years finally broke. Wyatt sat in a chair beside the bed, his own exhaustion catching up with him. They didn't talk. Didn't need to. just sat together in silence while Black Hollow slowly woke up to its first day of freedom in 15 years. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky. Federal deputies were processing prisoners, taking statements, beginning the official investigation. Vivian was coordinating with them, providing the evidence she'd spent a decade gathering. The wheels of justice, slow and imperfect, finally starting to turn. Ruth and Jacob found Wyatt an hour later, both looking as exhausted as he felt. "Town's in shock," Ruth said, sitting down with a heavy sigh. "Half of them can't believe Silas is really gone. The other half don't know what to do without him. He controlled everything for so long, people forgot how to make decisions for themselves." "They'll remember," Wyatt said. "It'll take time, but they'll remember." "What about you?" Jacob asked. "You staying or heading back to Iron Ridge?" It was a good question. Wyatt had a ranch to run, a business to manage, a life waiting for him beyond Black Hollow. He'd done what he came to do, more than he came to do. He could leave with clear conscience, knowing he'd made a difference. But when he looked at Elena sleeping in the next room, at Ruth and Jacob who'd stood with him when they had no reason to, at Black Hollow visible through the window, still learning how to breathe free, he found he wasn't ready to leave just yet. "I'll stay a while," he said. "Make sure things settle properly. Help however I can." Ruth smiled. "Figured you'd say that. You're a terrible businessman, Sterling. Any sensible cattle baron would have left days ago." "Yeah, well, never claimed to be sensible." They sat together as morning turned to afternoon, three exhausted people who'd somehow survived a war. Outside, Black Hollow began the long, difficult work of healing from 15 years of violence. It wouldn't be easy. The scars ran deep. But at least now, for the first time in far too long, people could heal without fear. Vivian came by around sunset, looking official and competent in a way that suggested she'd done this before. "Federal investigation is moving forward. We've got enough evidence to charge Silas posthumously with at least 8 murders, multiple assaults, fraud, conspiracy. It'll be months before the paperwork's done, but Black Hollow's officially free of his legal grip." "What happens to his ranch?" Wyatt asked. "Goes into receivership, eventually auctioned off to pay debts and restitution to victims. Elena will get a settlement from the estate. She's entitled to it as his widow." "She won't want it. She's earned it," Vivian said firmly. 3 years of hell? She's owed something. Whether she keeps it or gives it away is her choice. That night, Wyatt stood outside Dr. Boone's office, looking up at stars that seemed brighter than before. Maybe because the smoke had finally cleared. Maybe because fear wasn't choking the air anymore. He thought about Caroline, about the 6 years he'd spent mourning her by building an empire that meant nothing. Thought about how close he'd come to riding past Black Hollow entirely, to never hearing Elena's screams, to leaving this town to suffer under Silas's rule. He hadn't saved Caroline, couldn't save her. Fever had taken her and no amount of money or power could have stopped it. But he'd saved Elena, saved Ruth and Jacob and Dr. Boone. Saved Black Hollow, in a way. Not perfectly, not without cost, but saved them nonetheless. Maybe that was enough. Maybe redemption wasn't about erasing past failures. Maybe it was about showing up when it mattered, standing when others couldn't, refusing to let cruelty win just because fighting it was hard. The door opened behind him. Elena stood there, wrapped in a blanket, moving carefully. She shouldn't have been up, but Wyatt didn't tell her that. Just made space for her to stand beside him. "Dr. Boone says the baby's strong," she said quietly. "Says we both might actually survive this." "You're stronger than you think." "I didn't feel strong. Not when Silas was dragging me away. Not when I thought he'd won. Strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about asking for help when you need it. You did that. The rest followed." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Black Hollow settle into its first peaceful night in years. "What will you do?" Elena asked. "After you leave, I mean. Go back to your cattle empire?" "Eventually. But not yet. Figure I'll stick around a while. Make sure you and the baby have what you need. Help the town get back on its feet." "That's not your responsibility." "Maybe not. But I'm making it my responsibility anyway." Elena nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for everything. For seeing me as worth saving. You are worth saving. Every person in this town is. Sometimes it just takes an outsider to remind people of that. Above them, stars wheeled in the vast frontier sky, indifferent and eternal. Below,
Black Hollow breathed easier, wounded but alive, beginning the slow transformation from prison to home. And somewhere in that space between darkness and dawn, between violence and peace, between what was and what could be, hope took root. It was fragile. It was uncertain, but it was real. And sometimes that was enough. The weeks that followed Silas's death moved with the strange, disjointed rhythm of a town learning to live without fear. Some days felt almost normal. Businesses opened, children played in streets, people went about their routines. Other days, the weight of 15 years came crashing down, and Black Hollow seemed to collectively hold its breath, waiting for the violence to return. But it didn't return. Silas was buried in an unmarked grave outside town, attended only by the federal deputies who needed to document his death officially. No one mourned. No one pretended to. His ranch sat empty for 3 weeks before the territorial court appointed receivers to manage the property and livestock. His hired guns had scattered to wherever men like that went when their paycheck disappeared. Most of his loyal ranch hands found work elsewhere or left the territory entirely. Black Hollow exhaled slowly, like a person who'd been underwater too long finally breaking the surface. Wyatt stayed. He told himself it was temporary, just until Elena had her baby, just until the federal investigation wrapped up, just until the town found its footing. But weeks turned into a month, and he was still there, living in Ruth's boarding house, helping where he could. His wound healed slowly. Dr. Boone changed the dressing every other day, muttering about stubborn cattle barons who didn't rest properly. The scar tissue was thick and angry, a permanent reminder of the morning Silas died. Wyatt didn't mind it. Some things were worth scarring over. Elena's pregnancy progressed with complications that kept Dr. Boone constantly worried. The stress and trauma had taken their toll. She had pain, bleeding, moments where the baby stopped moving, and everyone held their breath until movement returned. But she was stubborn, determined to survive, to bring this child into a world without Silas Crow. "You should go back to your ranch," she told Wyatt one afternoon in early October. They were sitting on Ruth's porch, watching the street. Elena's belly was enormous now, making even simple movement difficult. "You've done enough, more than enough. I'll leave when you're safe." "I'm as safe as I'm going to get. Silas is dead. The investigation's nearly done. Black Hollow's recovering." She shifted, trying to find a comfortable position. "You have a business to run, Mr. Sterling, a life waiting for you." "The business runs fine without me. My foreman's been handling things for weeks. And as for life," Wyatt trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Elena looked at him with knowing eyes. "You're trying to fix something that happened a long time ago. Something that can't be fixed by staying here. Is it that obvious?" "To anyone paying attention, yes." She smiled slightly. "Your wife. The one who died. You think saving me makes up for not saving her?" Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe. It doesn't work that way. Grief doesn't balance like accounting. You can't credit one life against another and call yourself square. I know that. Logically, I know that." He rubbed his face, tired. "But being here, helping you in this town, it's the first time in 6 years I've felt like what I'm doing matters. Back at Iron Ridge, I'm just making money. Here, I'm making a difference?" "Something like that." Elena reached over, touched his hand briefly. "You made a difference. Past tense. You freed a town, killed a monster, gave people hope. That's done. Complete. Whatever debt you think you owe to your wife's memory, you've paid it. Now you have to decide what you actually want, not what you think you should want." Before Wyatt could respond, Ruth came out onto the porch, wiping flour from her hands. "Federal Marshal's here, wants to speak with you both." The marshal was a man named Harrison Cole, mid-50s, with the weathered competence of someone who'd spent decades enforcing law in places where law barely existed. He'd been coming and going from Black Hollow for weeks, taking statements, gathering evidence, building the official case against Silas's criminal enterprise. They met in Ruth's parlor. Cole sat with a leather folder full of documents, organizing them with methodical precision. "Good news first," he said without preamble. "The territorial court has officially ruled on Silas Crow's estate. Mrs. Voss, as his legal widow, you're entitled to a substantial settlement. The ranch, livestock, and remaining assets will be auctioned.
After debts and restitution to other victims, you'll receive approximately $8,000. Elena went pale. I don't want his money. With respect, ma'am, you earned it. 3 years of abuse? You're entitled to compensation. Cole's voice was firm, but not unkind. What you do with the money after you receive it is your business, but legally, it's yours. What about the other victims? Wyatt asked. The families of people Silas killed? They'll get settlements too. We've identified 7 families with clear claims. Each will receive between $500 and $2,000, depending on circumstances. It's not much. Money can't replace lost loved ones, but it's something. Cole pulled out another document. Mr. Sterling, you're also mentioned in the settlement. The territorial governor is authorizing a reward of $1,000 for your role in bringing Silas to justice. I don't want a reward. Too bad. It's official. You can donate it if you want, but it's coming to you either way. Cole closed his folder. There's one more thing. Vivian Crow has filed paperwork to reclaim the ranch that was originally stolen from her first husband's family. Her case is strong. She'll likely win. What will she do with it? Ruth asked. Run it, from what I understand. She's hiring new hands, rebuilding. Says she wants to turn it into something decent. A working ranch that pays fair wages and doesn't terrorize the territory. Cole stood, preparing to leave. The investigation is officially closed. Silas Crow's criminal empire is dismantled. Justice, as much as frontier justice ever is, has been served. After he left, the 3 of them sat in silence. $8,000 was a fortune. Life-changing money for someone like Elena, who'd spent her adult life in poverty and abuse. I'm going to give most of it away, she said finally, to the families who lost people, to the town, for rebuilding. I'll keep enough to get started somewhere, but the rest, she shook her head. I can't benefit from his evil. Won't. That's your choice to make, Wyatt said. But don't be stupid about it. You've got a baby coming. You'll need resources. I'll manage. Women always do. 3 days later, Elena went into labor. It started just before dawn, her water breaking, contractions beginning, the terrifying, inevitable process of bringing new life into the world. Ruth sent someone running for Dr. Boone, got Elena upstairs to the room they'd prepared, started boiling water and gathering supplies. Wyatt paced downstairs, useless and anxious. Jacob had appeared at some point, equally useless, and they paced together like expectant fathers, though neither of them was actually the father. Should be me up there, Jacob muttered. I've birthed calves and foals. Can't be that different. Pretty sure it's very different, Wyatt replied. Hours passed. Upstairs they could hear Elena's screams, raw, primal sounds that made Wyatt's stomach clench with sympathetic pain. Dr. Boone's voice, calm and steady, giving instructions. Ruth's responses, efficient and practical. Then, around 3 in the afternoon, a different sound. A baby's cry, thin and wavering, but undeniably alive. Wyatt and Jacob looked at each other. Neither spoke. Just listened to that tiny voice announcing its arrival to a world that had almost killed it before it was born. Ruth appeared at the top of the stairs, exhausted but smiling. It's a girl, healthy lungs, all her fingers and toes. Elena's alive. They're both alive. The relief was physical, nearly buckling Wyatt's knees. He'd been braced for tragedy, for complications, for the kind of ending that frontier childbirth too often delivered. But against odds that should have been insurmountable, both mother and child had survived. Can we see them? Jacob asked. Give Dr. Boone a few more minutes. Then, yes. When they finally went up, they found Elena propped against pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked utterly exhausted, her face pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes. But she was smiling, really smiling, in a way Wyatt had never seen. Her name is Rose, Elena said softly, looking down at the baby. After my mother, and because roses survive in hard soil. The baby was tiny, wrinkled, perfect. She had a shock of dark hair in her mother's delicate features. As Wyatt watched, Rose opened her eyes, dark blue, unfocused, and made a small sound that might have been comfort or complaint. She's beautiful, Ruth said, and her voice was thick with emotion. She's alive, Elena replied. That's more than I hoped for. Dr. Boone was packing up his supplies, moving with the careful precision of someone at the end of a long, stressful procedure. Mother and daughter are both stable, but Elena needs rest. Weeks of it. No stress, no heavy lifting, proper nutrition. The trauma she endured during pregnancy, both of them are lucky to have survived. They'll get whatever they need, Wyatt said. I'll make sure of it. That night, as Black Hollow settled into darkness, Wyatt stood outside again, looking at those same indifferent stars. Inside Ruth's boarding house, a newborn baby slept in her mother's arms. Both of them alive. Both of them free. Both of them facing futures that, for the first time in years, held possibility instead of just survival. He thought about what Elena had said, about trying to fix the unfixable, about using her salvation as penance for Caroline's death. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had been doing that unconsciously, using Black Hollow to fill a hole that couldn't be filled. But standing there, knowing Rose was alive, knowing Elena would raise her daughter without fear, Wyatt found he didn't care why he'd stayed. The outcome mattered more than the motivation. The weeks after Rose's birth brought unexpected changes. Elena recovered slowly, her body healing from trauma that went deeper than just childbirth. Ruth hovered like a protective grandmother, making sure Elena ate properly, rested enough, didn't try to do too much too soon. Jacob carved a wooden rattle for Rose, spent hours sitting with Elena just keeping her company. Black Hollow itself was changing too. With Silas gone and his economic stranglehold broken, people started making different choices. A family who'd been planning to leave decided to stay. A young man opened a new store, competing with the old general store that Silas had controlled. The sheriff, the real one, not Silas's puppet, resigned in shame, and the town held an actual election for his replacement. Small changes, incremental, but in the right direction. Vivian Crow came to visit one afternoon in November. She'd taken possession of the ranch, was already making changes, repairing buildings, hiring new hands, establishing fair wages and decent conditions. She looked different than she had the morning of the battle, less haunted, more present. I wanted to thank you, she told Wyatt. They were sitting on Ruth's porch again. It had become his favorite spot, a place to watch the world without being in it. For finishing what I couldn't. For 15 years, I've been trying to stop Silas, to bring him to justice. But it took you, an outsider with no stake in Black Hollow, to actually do it. You provided the evidence, the backup. I just happened to be here when things came to a head. You were here because you chose to be. That matters. Vivian looked out at the street, at people going about their business. The frontier's full of men who look away when they see wrong, who decide it's not their problem, not their fight. You didn't do that. You stood, and you paid the price for standing. The price wasn't that high. I'm still alive. Alive and changed. Can't go through what you went through and come out the same person. She smiled slightly. I know. I've been changed by this for 15 years. Some days I barely recognize the woman I used to be. Do you regret it? The years spent investigating, gathering evidence, waiting for justice? No. Regret implies I had better options. I didn't. Silas tried to kill me. Succeeded in killing the woman I was before. What was I supposed to do? Forget? Move on? Let him keep destroying lives? Vivian shook her head. Some wrongs can't be forgiven, can't be ignored. They have to be answered, even if the answer takes decades. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two people who'd fought the same monster through different methods. What will you do now? Vivian asked. Stay in Black Hollow. Return to your ranch. It was the question everyone kept asking, the question Wyatt still didn't have a good answer for. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to go back to Iron Ridge, pick up my life where I left it, but that life feels hollow now, like putting on clothes that don't fit anymore. You've seen what matters. Hard to go back to just making money once you've tasted purpose. Is that what this is? Purpose? What else would you call it? Wyatt thought about Elena and Rose, about Ruth and Jacob and Dr. Boone, about Black Hollow slowly learning to breathe without fear, about the difference between building wealth and building something that actually mattered. I guess I'd call it responsibility, he said slowly. I helped break Silas's control. That means I'm responsible for what comes after. Can't just destroy something and walk away without helping build what replaces it. That's a long-term commitment. Black Hollow's rebuilding will take years. I know. Vivian studied him for a moment, then smiled. You're going to stay, aren't you? Not temporarily. Actually stay. Maybe. I haven't decided yet. But even as he said it, Wyatt knew the decision was already made. Had been made weeks ago, maybe even months ago. He just hadn't admitted it to himself yet. In December, as frontier winter settled over Black Hollow with teeth and claws, Wyatt made it official. He sent word to his foreman at Iron Ridge, sell the ranch. All of it. The land, the cattle, the horses, the buildings. Find buyers who'd treat it right, who'd continue the legacy he'd built. Take a generous percentage for himself and distribute bonuses to the ranch hands who'd been loyal over the years. The responses came back quickly. Tom Garrett, his foreman, was shocked but understood. The sale would take months to finalize, but buyers were already interested. Iron Ridge had a reputation. It would sell well. Ruth found Wyatt reading the letters in her parlor, a fire crackling in the hearth, Rose sleeping in a cradle nearby. Elena was upstairs resting, still regaining strength. "You're really doing it," Ruth said, sitting down across from him. "Selling everything." "Seems like." "Why?" "Because I don't belong there anymore. I built Iron Ridge to fill a hole Caroline left behind. But it never filled it, just made the hole deeper, darker. Here," he gestured vaguely at the room, the town beyond. "Here I feel like I'm actually doing something, not just surviving or accumulating, actually making a difference." "That's good reasoning. But what will you do here? Black Hollow's not a cattle town, doesn't have the land or resources for that kind of operation." "I've been thinking about that." Wyatt leaned forward. "This town needs investment, real investment, not the exploitative control Silas exercised. New businesses, better infrastructure, opportunities for people to build lives. I've got the capital to do that, to be a partner in Black Hollow's rebuilding, not its owner." "That's ambitious. So is taking on Silas." Ruth smiled. "Fair point. What does Elena think?" "Haven't told her yet. Wanted to make sure it was really what I wanted before bringing it up. She cares about you, you know. Not romantically. She's too smart to confuse gratitude with love. But she cares. Worries about you making decisions based on guilt instead of genuine desire." "And which is this?" "You tell me." Wyatt looked at the sleeping baby, at the peaceful room, at the life he'd somehow stumbled into. "I think it's both. Guilt and desire all tangled together. But I've learned something these past months. You can't always untangle your motivations perfectly. Sometimes you just have to act on what feels right and trust that the reasons will clarify later. That's surprisingly wise for a cattle baron." "Former cattle baron," Ruth laughed. "Former cattle baron. What should we call you now? Unemployed, an investor, a man who doesn't know what he's doing but is committed to doing it anyway?" "How about friend? That seems most accurate." It was the simplest description and the truest. Wyatt had arrived in Black Hollow as a wealthy outsider. He was staying as something else entirely, something better. Elena came down the stairs slowly, moving carefully, still recovering. She'd filled out slightly since Rose's birth, color returning to her face, but she still looked fragile. Dr. Boone said it would be months before she was fully recovered, if ever. The body kept score of trauma in ways that never fully healed. "Did I hear something about selling your ranch?" she asked, settling into a chair near the fire. "News travels fast. It's a small boarding house, hard to keep secrets." She looked at him steadily. "Why?" "Because I don't want to go back. Because what I built there doesn't matter compared to what's being built here. Because..." He hesitated, then decided honesty was simplest. "Because for the first time in 6 years, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." Elena was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on Rose's cradle, gently rocking. "That's a lot to give up. Your empire, your reputation, your entire life." "My empire was just cattle. My reputation was just money, and my life was just going through motions." Wyatt looked at her directly. "I don't expect anything from you. Want to be clear about that. This isn't about..." "I know what it's not about," Elena interrupted gently. "You're not trying to rescue me anymore. You're trying to rescue yourself." "Is that what I'm doing? Isn't it? You're leaving behind everything that reminds you of failure and loss, starting over in a place where you succeeded, where you made a difference. That's self-rescue. Is that wrong?" "No, it's human. We all want to escape our pain, find places where we feel whole instead of broken." She smiled slightly. "Just don't pretend this is entirely selfless. You're allowed to make choices that benefit you." It was the same conversation from a different angle, and Wyatt realized Elena understood him better than he'd understood himself. She'd spent 3 years surviving Silas by learning to read people, to understand motivations and fears. That skill hadn't disappeared just because Silas had. "So what do you think?" he asked. "Am I making a mistake?" "I think you're making a choice. Whether it's a mistake, you won't know for years. But it's your choice to make, and it seems like you've already made it." Rose stirred in her cradle, making small sounds. Elena picked her up automatically, the motion already second nature after just weeks of motherhood. The baby settled against her shoulder, eyes closing again. "I'm staying too," Elena said quietly. "In Black Hollow, I mean. Dr. Boone offered me work as his assistant. Not much pay, but steady, and Ruth says Rose and I can stay here as long as we need." "You could do better," Wyatt said. "With your settlement money, you could go anywhere. Start fresh somewhere no one knows your history." "I could. But running away feels like letting Silas win. He wanted me broken, hidden, erased. Staying here, raising my daughter in the town he terrorized, building a life from the ruins of his empire. That's revenge of a sort. The best kind, maybe." Wyatt understood that. They were both choosing to stay in a place that held pain and memory, not despite the difficulty, but because of it. Because easy escape wasn't the same as real healing. Winter deepened, and with it came the slow, necessary work of building something new from Black Hollow's ruins. Wyatt invested in the town carefully, thoughtfully, a loan to help the new general store expand, funding for a proper schoolhouse, partnership with Jacob and 2 other ranchers to establish a cooperative that would give small operators better market access. It wasn't glamorous work, wasn't the kind of empire building that made legends, but it was real, and it mattered to the people it affected. Elena started working with Dr. Boone, learning basic medical care while Rose slept in a cradle in the corner of his office. She had a natural talent for it, a gentle touch and calm presence that put frightened patients at ease. Dr. Boone said she'd make a fine nurse someday, maybe even a doctor if she wanted the training. Ruth's boarding house became an unofficial community center, a place where people gathered to discuss town business, share news, work through the complicated process of governing themselves without Silas's iron control. Democracy was messy and frustrating, but it was theirs. Jacob spent his time mentoring younger ranchers, teaching them the skills he'd learned over decades. He seemed younger somehow, energized by having purpose beyond just surviving. By the time spring arrived, Black Hollow looked different. Not physically, buildings were still weathered, streets still muddy, the frontier still brutal. But atmospherically, something had shifted. People walked with their heads up. Businesses stayed open late. Children played loudly instead of quietly. Fear had loosened its grip, and in its absence, life was creeping back in. Wyatt stood on Ruth's porch one evening in April, watching the sunset paint Black Hollow in shades of gold and amber. Elena joined him, Rose balanced on her hip. The baby was bigger now, 4 months old, starting to focus on faces and smile at familiar voices. "You ever regret it?" Elena asked. "Giving up Iron Ridge? The wealth and prestige?" "No, not once." Wyatt took Rose from her, cradled the baby with the awkward confidence of someone still learning. Rose grabbed his finger, held on tight. "I had wealth and prestige for 6 years, made me miserable. This..." He gestured at the town with his free hand. "This makes me feel useful." "Useful is underrated," Elena agreed. "Most people chase success or happiness, but useful, that's harder to find." They stood together, watching Black Hollow settle into evening. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lamplight glowed in windows. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing a fiddle, the music cheerful and slightly off-key. "I've been thinking," Elena said after a while, "about the future, about what Rose should know about where she came from." "What have you decided?" Rose made a bubbling sound, seemed pleased with herself. Wyatt handed her back to Elena, watched mother and daughter together. They looked healthy now, both of them, the worst of the trauma receding into memory. "I heard you're planning to build a new house," Elena said, "on the edge of town. Word travels fast." "Small town, small boarding house," she smiled, "where everyone knows everyone's business. I need somewhere permanent. Can't live in Ruth's parlor forever." Wyatt had purchased land from the town, a small plot with a view of the hills. Nothing grand, just a solid frontier house. A place to call home. Construction starts next month. That's good. You should have a home. So should you. I'd have been meaning to talk to you about that. Wyatt had been working on this for weeks, arranging details, making sure everything was proper and legal. Your settlement money from Silas's estate, the $8,000. I've set up a trust. Elena frowned. A trust? For Rose. The full amount, invested properly, will grow. By the time she's 18, she'll have enough to go to school, start a business, do whatever she wants. She'll never be trapped the way you were. Never have to marry for security or tolerate abuse because she has no options. Elena's eyes filled with tears. You didn't have to do that. I know, but I wanted to. You said you were giving most of the money away to victims' families. This way, you're giving it to the most important victim, Rose's future self. The child who almost didn't get born because of Silas's cruelty. Thank you, Elena whispered, for everything, for saving us, for staying, for caring when you had no reason to. I had reasons, Wyatt said. Maybe not good ones at first, but they got better over time. The fiddle music drifted through the evening air, mixing with the sound of distant conversation and closer laughter. Black Hollow wasn't perfect, would never be perfect, but it was healing, growing, becoming something new. 3 years later, on a warm summer evening, Wyatt sat on the porch of his house, watching the hills turn purple in the fading light. Rose was playing in the yard, now a sturdy 3-year-old with her mother's dark hair and a stubbornness that suggested she'd grow up strong. Elena worked in a small garden nearby, her movements easy and confident in ways they hadn't been when they first met. Vivian's ranch had become the largest employer in the territory, known for fair wages and decent treatment. She'd married one of her ranch hands, a quiet man who treated her with the respect she'd been denied her entire first marriage.